Chapter 5 Spice Wars. The next day Han took the Elysian shuttle to Colony 2 and Colony 3. He discovered that he really enjoyed piloting bigger ships, and his piloting was perfect. He managed to find a few extra minutes on his return run to Colony 1 to practice low-altitude flying, swooping the shuttle so low that the belly nearly brushed the tops of the jungle trees. Beside him in the co-pilot's seat, Muir alternated between exhilaration and terror as the Tagorian experienced swoops, barrel rolls, and even upside-down high-speed flying. Han was in his element, putting the shuttle through maneuvers he'd only done previously during sims. The Corellian found himself whooping joyously at the sheer thrill of it all. For his last, best bit of precision flying, Han sent the shuttle hurtling down a river-cut canyon, skimming between the rock walls with so little room to spare that Muir yowled, shut his eyes, and refused to open them. Once they were soaring through open skies again, Han had to shake the Tagorian's arm and repeatedly reassure the big alien that he was finished practicing for the day. "Muir Thurton that piloteth crazy," the Tagorian said, cautiously opening his eyes and straightening up in his seat. "Muir flyth on hith Mothgoth at home, but not like that. Mothgoth have more thenth than to fly like that. Muir have more thenth to pilot." The Tagorian gave Han a plaintive glance, prometh Muir not to fly crazy again. "But Muir," Han said, carefully setting them down on the landing field at Colony 1, "I've got to practice every chance I get." "You see," he hesitated, then decided to trust Muir with part of the truth. "I sort of stretched the facts a little when I told Teroenza about my flying experience. I really am a champion pilot, that's the truth, but I need to practice with this shuttle. And with the bigger ships. Sims are fine, but they can't beat the real thing." Muir gave Han a long level look, then nodded. "Muir understand pilot truth." Muir not to thay thith to Teroentha. "Yeah, something like that," Han said. "Can I trust you, I mean?" The Tagorian groomed his white whiskers thoughtfully. "As long as pilot does not crash, Muir does not talk." "Fair enough, pal," Han said with a grin. When he and Muir came down the ramp from the ship, Veritil was there, waiting for them in the pouring rain. By this time Han was growing used to the daily downpours, though the steamy heat still exhausted him. "The High Priest wishes to see you at once, Pilot Drago," Veritil said. The Sacerdot led the Corellian and his bodyguard to the High Priest's personal quarters, which occupied a large part of the underground level of the administration center. When Veritil keyed in the security bypass codes and they walked through the huge double doors into the High Priest's personal sanctum, Han couldn't repress a low whistle of amazement. "Nice place. This is the High Priest's display room," Veritil said. "He is an avid collector, and very proud of his collection of rarities." "He deserves to be," Han said sincerely. The room was easily 10 times the size of Han's little apartment on the first floor. Display tables, shelves, and racks showcased treasures and antiquities from around the galaxy. Sculpture from a dozen worlds, paintings, and other art objects were scattered amid ornate antique weapons. Tapestries hung from the walls. Rugs of exquisite beauty were covered by protective force fields that felt squishy underfoot as Han walked on them. Semi-precious gems adorned the collection of pipes and other musical instruments. Bottles of the rarest liquors in the entire galaxy were suspended in a gold-embossed rack. Han's fingers literally itched for the whole time it took him to traverse the display room. "If I could have 5 minutes alone in here, I'd be set for life," he thought wistfully as he slowed down to peer at a Drealb carved from living ice. The tiny statue was covered with a layer of dust, which was disturbed by Han's breath. It wafted up into the air, and the pilot sneezed thunderously. "Dust or no dust, this place is worth several fortunes." If only. Sternly, Han reminded himself that he had turned over a new leaf, and was an honest, hard-working citizen these days. Veritil led them through another security door into the high priest's personal living quarters. The visitors were ushered into the room by an ancient Xizian majordomo, whom Teroenza addressed as Ganer Taz. The Xizian was humanoid, but he had wrinkly green skin that hung in flaccid wattles from his receding chin line. His orange eyes were rheumy, and he snuffled constantly, as though he had a sinus infection. Probably allergic to all that dust, Han thought. The high priest waved Han and Muir to seats and addressed them. So good of you to come pilot Drago. I hear good things about your piloting from Colony 2 and 3. Today our medical droid placed our other pilot, Jalis Nebel, on indefinite sick leave, so you will be taking his place on interstellar flights from now on. Han nodded, trying not to betray his excitement. Fine, sir. I'll keep on schedule. When do I go? The day after tomorrow, Teroenza said. Muirg will, of course, accompany you. What's the cargo and destination, sir? Han asked. You will rendezvous with a ship from Nal Hutta at coordinates we will provide you with at the last minute. Security is vital, as I'm sure you can understand. You know that we have had trouble with pirates in the past. Teroenza accepted a small limp creature from a tray the majordomo held out to him and paused to gulp it. Have you trained Muirg as a gunner? Pilot? No, not yet, sir. See that you do. A good pilot is prepared for all eventualities, correct? Yes, sir, Han said. I'll see to it. Sir? What's the cargo? You'll be carrying a load of processed carcinum, and picking up a load of raw Ryle transshipped from Ryloth. But the ship I'm meeting is from Nal Hutta? Yes. Teroenza did not expand upon this, so Han dropped the subject, resolving to keep his ears open. He sensed that there was more that the high priest wasn't telling him, but he was hardly in a position to demand to know all the ins and outs. Teroenza sat back on his massive haunches, small arms waving at the portal through which Muirg and Han had entered. I gather you like my display room? Liked? Han was able to speak with complete honesty. It was great, sir. I have never seen so many treasures gathered together outside of a museum. My species is long-lived, as are our cousins, the Hutts, Teroenza said. I have been collecting for hundreds of standard years, longer than you, in your youth, can imagine, pilot. I'd really like to get a grand tour sometime, Han said. I wish my collection were in condition to be viewed, Teroenza said regretfully. Ganer Taz, though an excellent cook and an efficient houseboy, hasn't the training to maintain it, much less catalog and arrange everything properly. And I am too busy to indulge myself that way. The giant being gave them a dismissive wave of a tiny hand. That will be all for now. I shall see you upon your return, pilot. Yes, sir. Han stood and beckoned to Muirg. They left, escorted by Veritil. Once outside, the Sacrodot went off on an errand, leaving them to themselves. Han glanced at his chrono and then at the westering sun. Tonight I'm going to start training you on gunner's duties, he told the Togorian, but right now, I think we're owed a break. Matter of fact, we're just in time to visit the refectory where the pilgrims eat. Let's go. Why? Muirg asked. Pilot not want pilgrim food. Pilot and Muirg eat in mess hall, get decent food, not garbage. Han shook his head and started walking down the path that led through the jungle to the pilgrims' area. I don't want to eat with the pilgrims, pal, he explained. I just want to talk to some of them. I figure at dinner, they'll all be together, and I can find them easier. Them? Muirg echoed. How many of them? Well, you see, Han started, then he stopped, grimacing. Just one, he admitted. Pilgrim 921, the one I saw the other day. I'd like to see what she really looks like. Muir nodded. Ah yes. Muir understand very well what pilot wants. Han felt his face grow hot, and was glad that the Togorian wouldn't recognize that giveaway as a sign of embarrassment. You know Muir, old pal, he said, deliberately changing the subject, you speak pretty good basic for someone who's been speaking it for less than a year. But there's one part of speech you ain't mastered yet, and that's the pronoun. Never thought I'd find myself playing schoolteacher, but, here goes. The two walked on down the path together, as Han laboriously covered the grammatical rules governing the use of pronouns. Once in the refectory, Han and Muir roamed the huge dining area. Han glanced from face to face, wondering if he'd managed to recognize her without the goggles in normal light. Her hair had been covered by the cap, so he didn't even know if it was dark or light. He walked faster, realizing the meal was nearly over, and he still hadn't found 921. Maybe she wasn't here. Maybe she ate during another shift, the way he heard some of the pilgrims did. But he'd thought most of the humanoids ate during this shift. There she is. That's her. Han wasn't even sure how he knew, but he was as positive as if she'd had a sign around her neck that read Pilgrim 921. Seen in normal light, he could tell that she was tall, and slender, too slender really. Her cheekbones stood out prominently, and her eyes seemed even larger than they were in her thin, excessively pale face. But too thin or not, she was, quite simply, lovely. Not classically beautiful. Her jaw was a little too wide and squarish, her nose a bit too long, for classic beauty. But lovely, oh yes. 921 had big blue-green eyes, long dark lashes, and poreless white skin. Several locks of short curly hair had escaped from beneath her pilgrim's cap, and Han saw that it was reddish gold. The color of a Karelian sunset on a clear day. The refectory hall was usually pretty quiet. The pilgrims didn't talk much, tired as they were from a long day's work in the factories, and the approaching exaltation. But they usually ate in groups. 921 was all alone. Han saw that she was poking at her dinner, and after one look at the unappetizing mess of gruel-like porridge, limp greens and flatbread on her plate, he didn't blame her. The food smelled bad, almost spoiled. Han's nose wrinkled as he pulled out the seat opposite her and sat down. He was dimly aware of Muir, leaning against the wall watching him. 921, I've got to get her to tell me her real name. Looked up, and her turquoise eyes widened as she recognized him. Han was inordinately pleased about that and grinned at her. Hello. Found you again, see? She stared at him, eyes wide, then she looked down at her plate. Han leaned toward her. So what's for dinner? Doesn't look great, I gotta admit. But you've got to do more than just push it around your plate, you know. She shook her head. Please, go away. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm not supposed to be talking to you. You're not of the one. Sure I am, Han said. I'm just a little bit more of an individual one, I guess you'd say. 921's mouth quirked, very slightly. Han found himself wishing he could make her really smile. You don't know what you're talking about, Pilot Drago, she said softly. I'm afraid that's obvious. Well, proselytize to me then, Han said. I've got an open mind. Maybe you can convert me. He smiled, happy that he'd found her, and that she was, at least, talking to him. 921 shook her head. I'm afraid you're much too much of an unbeliever pilot, she said. Han reached out across the table and took her hand, the one she'd injured. It's Vic, he told her, having to fight a crazy impulse to tell her his real name. But he managed to resist. So how is your hand? Any ill effects from the other day? When he'd first touched her, she'd stiffened, as though to pull away, then when he inquired about the cut, she relaxed. It's healing, she told him, confirming what his eyes told him. It will just take a little time. It's a tough job, working down there in the dark and the cold all day long, Han said. Wouldn't you rather do something a little easier? Like what? She asked. I don't know, he said. What are you good at? What have you studied? Well, at one time I wanted to be a curator in a museum, she said, sounding faintly wistful. I was going to study archaeology. I know quite a bit about that. But you came here instead of going on with your studies, Han guessed. Yes, 921 answered. This life is spiritually fulfilling. My old life was empty and meaningless. Han hesitated. How do you know that the doctrine they teach here is the right one? There are a lot of religions in the galaxy. She considered his question carefully, then finally replied, because when we are exalted, I feel very close to the One. It's a mystical moment. I feel one with the All. I'm sure the priests must be divinely gifted to be able to offer the pilgrims the chance to be exalted. Han said. Sounds like maybe I should give it a try. Over my dead body, he thought, but was careful to conceal his true feelings. Perhaps you should, she said. It's time to head for the altar of promises now. Perhaps you'll be blessed by receiving the exaltation too. You never know, Han said. Can I walk you there? She smiled a little, eyes downcast. All right. They walked together up the jungle path, side by side amid the pilgrims, with Muir trailing behind. Han tried to make conversation, but 921 was silent and unresponsive. When they reached the altar, Han did not withdraw to the back, but instead stood beside 921 in the midst of the group of believers. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. It's obvious you're not a pilgrim. If anyone complains, just tell them I'm a pilgrim candidate, Han said, trying to gently tease her, but 921 wasn't having it. She scowled and turned away from him, concentrating on the ceremony. Teroenza and the other priests treated the crowd of faithful to a devotion that was identical to the one Han had attended before. This time, Han had little trouble resisting the effects of the exaltation, he remained clear-headed throughout. Instead, he watched 921, saw her rapt face, and inwardly shook his head. How can she be taken in by this ridiculous bilge, he wondered. She's obviously intelligent. Why can't she see that however these priests do what they do, it's some kind of trick, not a divine gift? Han watched in distress as 921 sank to the ground to receive the exaltation, then he crouched beside her as she writhed on the ground. It's a miracle their hearts don't just stop, he thought. Later, when the moment of exaltation was over, and the priests were gone, he helped her to sit up. She was smiling, though very weak. You okay? He asked, concerned. The exaltation, whatever its physical and emotional effects, seemed to leave the pilgrims drained. You don't look so good. I'm fine, she said, still trembling, and tried to get up. Han was quick to catch her and offer a steadying hand. Thank you, she whispered, her breath still ragged. I'll be fine now. I'll walk you back to the dorm, he said. Just in case. You look kinda shaky. She didn't argue as he took her arm, and they started back along the path. It was growing quite dark now, and Ilesia had no moon. Han could barely make out the path ahead, but 921 produced her goggles from the pocket of her robe and put them on. She led the way, but he kept hold of her arm to steady her. "So do you ever miss Corellia?" he asked. "No," she said, but he could tell it was a lie. "Do you?" "I don't miss the people, but I miss the planet," Han said honestly. "Corellia's a nice place. I always wanted to go to the ocean, but I never got the chance." "Ever been to the ocean?" "Yes," she said slowly, as if his question brought back memories she'd rather not think about. "You got a family there?" "Yes," she hesitated, then added, "At least, I think so. I haven't talked with them in almost a year." "Is that how long you've been here?" Han asked. "Yes." They picked their way through the hot wet darkness in silence. Han was very conscious of holding her arm beneath the wide sleeve of her robe. Her bones were too close to the skin, but her flesh itself was warm and soft and very female. "So you planning to stay here for good?" Han asked as a small clot of shambling pilgrims passed them in the darkness. "Or is this just kind of temporary?" "Temporary?" He could barely see the light blur of her face, with the dark line of the goggles running across it, as she turned toward him. "How could it be temporary? I want to serve the One, be part of the All, forever." "Oh," Han said. "Well, what about stuff like, falling in love, traveling, maybe settling down someday and having kids?" "We give up those kinds of attachments when we become part of the All," she said, but there was a hint of regret in her voice. "Too bad," he said. Without warning, it began to rain steadily. Han could feel 921 shiver slightly, despite the warmth. He pulled a rain poncho out of his pocket and spread it over both their heads. They walked along, huddled beneath it, bodies touching. Han was conscious of Muir following at a discreet distance. "Poor guy. He hates to get wet." The pilot raised his voice to be heard above the spatter of the rain. "You know, I can't just go on calling you 921. If we're gonna be friends, you've gotta tell me your name." "Who says we're going to be friends?" she asked. "I just know it," Han told her. He grinned, knowing she could see him in the darkness. "I'm irresistible when I put my mind to it." "You're conceited, that's what you are," she said, sounding half vexed, half amused. "Conceited, cocky, arrogant, insufferable," she broke off, chuckling. Han realized it was the first time he'd heard her laugh. "Oh, go on, please," the pilot mock protested, laughing himself. "I love it when women compliment me. Music to my ears." He was delighted to hear her sounding so alive. "I'm tired," she said, her momentary good humor vanishing like morning mist. "And here we are at the dorm. Thanks for walking me back." Pilot Drago. There was a faint circle of light emanating from the windows in the dormitory, and Han stopped them right on the edge of it, so he could see her, but they wouldn't be fully illuminated to any onlooker. "Not Pilot," he reminded her. "It's Vic." She tried to step back, away from him, but Han tightened his grip on her arm, careful to be gentle, but not letting her pull away. "Vic, okay." "Vic, right," she said. "Now please, let me go. And, don't come back. Please." "Why not?" Han was hurt. "Because, you're not good for me. For my spiritual essence." He smiled in the hot darkness. "Admit it. You like me." "No, I don't." "Yes, you do. Admit it." He stepped closer to her, looking down into her face. She was tall, only half a head shorter than he was. Gently Han reached up to push the concealing goggles up, off her eyes. His fingers lingered on her cheek as he did it. "There," he said softly, "that's better. It's wrong, totally wrong, to cover this face, these eyes." You're being blasphemous," she said, sounding breathless, but she didn't jerk away. "No, I'm not," he said. "Tell me your name." She shook her head miserably, and her eyes were haunted. "Vic." "I can't." "All right. I can wait," Han thought. "But I will see you again, right?" She hesitated for so long that he found himself holding his breath. Then she ducked her head, mumbled, "Yes," and pulled away. This time, Han let her go. 921 ran away, into the dormitory, without looking back. Han leaned forward in the pilot's seat, glancing at the figures rolling by on the screen of the Navi computer. "Ready to enter real space, at rendezvous coordinates," he said aloud. 3, 2, 1. He pulled back the lever, and the stars around the Elysian Dream suddenly elongated into thin streaks of light, all reaching toward a central point, a point toward which the ship plunged. The engines roared, then throttled down, and then, with a suddenness that took some getting used to, they were back in real space. "Right on course, Muir," Han said triumphantly. "I'm getting this interstellar flying stuff down pat lately, ain't I?" "Aren't," the Tagorian corrected. "I have been reading book," pilot gave Muir. He stopped himself. Me, and ain't, is not correct way to talk basic." "Remind me to teach you about articles sometime," Han muttered. "Don't I even get a gold star for bringing us to the rendezvous right on the money?" "Much better than first time," Muir commented, referring to their first interstellar trip, 3 weeks ago. Han made a tiny error in programming the Navi computer on exactly where to bring them out of hyperspace, and the Dream had wound up 3 parsecs from where they were supposed to emerge. Han had had to make an extra hyperspace jump to bring them into correct position. "Hey," Han protested, "that was just my first time. And it wasn't my fault, that screen is so old that an 8 looked like a 6. "Pilot hath done better since then," Muir acknowledged. "Thakond and third trip went okay." "You bet they did," Han muttered. "I'm good, Muir. I really am. I'll bet that I could almost pass the exams to get into the Imperial Academy now. A few more months practice, and I'll really be set." "Muir will myth," the Tagorian paused. "Correction. I will myth pilot when he goes." "I'll miss you too, pal," Han said, meaning it. "But don't worry, we can." The Elysian Dream shuddered violently as a loud wang reverberated through her hull. "What the?" Han pushed buttons, turning on the rear view screen. "Muir, something hit us." "Asteroid," the Tagorian suggested. "Wang." "No," Han yelled, staring incredulously at the view screen. "2 ships, they've gotta be pirates, get to the gunner's well." As he stared at the screen, the rightmost vessel launched another shot. "Brace yourself." Muir, who had unstrapped himself and gotten up to head for the gunner's mount, yelled as another shot wanged against the hull, sending him back into his seat with bruising force. Cursing, Han yanked the Dream hard to port. Who were these guys? Pirates usually fired warning shots and demanded that the attacked vessel surrender. Their goal was to steal the cargo, commandeer the ship, and keep the crew alive so they could be sold as slaves. Destroying or crippling the ship and killing the crew wasn't cost-effective. "Muir, get below, they're gonna blast us into atoms, we've lost a shield." As the Tagorian propelled himself out of the co-pilot's seat and lurched out of the control room, 2 more shots grazed the Elysian Dream. "They're aiming at the hyperdrive engines. They're out to cripple us." Han sent the ship into a desperate roll, flipping her up on her side, just in time to avoid another blast that nearly cinched his underside and would have blown out his quad-X power core. He put on a burst of speed, trying to get far enough ahead of the pursuing pirates to double back and shoot them. He had little confidence in Muir's ability to actually hit anything while manning the gun well. The Togorian was quick and able, but he'd never actually shot at a live, much less moving, target. As he sent the ship hurtling recklessly along, straining her speed to the utmost, Han flipped open his communications channel. He had to let someone know what was happening, in case the dream was crippled and they got a chance to get to a life pod. Ilesia Colony 1, this is Ilesian Dream. Colony 1, this is the dream. We are under attack, repeat, under attack. 2 vessels jumped us just after we emerged from hyperspace. Han's voice cracked from the strain. Honest, it wasn't my fault. They're chasing us, and I'm taking evasive maneuvers. Pilot Drago out. Han glanced at the view screen with the sensor readouts below, saw that they'd gained on their pursuers. He still hadn't gotten a good look at the pirate ships, and then sent the dream spiraling down, beneath the oncoming ships. As they whooshed by overhead, he flipped his vessel up into a tight turn. Muir, now, he yelled into the intercom. A Togorian roar and a splat of energy rewarded his command, but Muir missed his quarry completely. One of the pirates had turned, and was firing again. Wham! The Ilesian Dream shook violently as the ship sustained a major hit. Han's stomach lurched as he heard a yowl of sheer agony float up from the gunwale. Muir, are you hit? He yelled, but there was no answer. A quick status check told him that they'd suffered a tiny drop in pressure, but that the leak had been automatically sealed by the ship's systems. All right, you creeps, Han muttered, homing in with his Arakid concussion missiles, centering the rightmost pirate in the cross sights. Take that. The dream lurched violently as the missile shot away. Han grimaced as the pirate managed to evade at the last second. He tried again, if he could just get him moving more to his port side. Yes, Han muttered savagely as he launched another missile right into the path of the pirate, anticipating his evasive maneuver. Gotcha. A second later a bright yellow-white light splashed out in all directions, expanding into a fireball of incandescent beauty. Han had to look away, and when he looked back, the other pirate was hightailing it in the opposite direction at full throttle. No you don't, Han growled. I'll get you too. With a fierce stab of his finger, he tracked and launched again. The concussion missile followed its target, but then the pirate ship vanished in a burst of striated light. They had jumped to hyperspace and safety. Han cursed under his breath as he put the dream on autopilot and bolted for the gunwale. Was Muir okay? Seconds later Han was standing in the ruins of the gun mount, seeing the pressure sealant that the dream's systems had automatically triggered to squirt out and mend the pressure leak. There was a strong ozone smell and scorch marks where the blast had hit them. Muir was still strapped in the movable seat, but the Togorian was slumped, unconscious, and he didn't stir as Han unstrapped him and managed to half carry, half drag him up the ladder to the control room. The Togorian was breathing, but there was a burn mark along one side of his head, just below his right ear. Han looked further, running his fingers through the black fur, and discovered a swelling lump just back of the ear. The Togorian had obviously taken a nasty blow to the head. Han wasn't sure what to do. He knew first aid for humans, and a few species of aliens, but Muir's people were rare in the galaxy. Got to get him to a medical facility, he thought, covering the unconscious alien with a blanket and going forward to check his Navi computer. Where's the nearest system? Han scanned star charts, then his finger stabbed down. Okay, he whispered. Here we go. He glanced over at the Togorian. Hang on Muir. Han programmed the ship for the short hyperspace hop, then, before giving the command, went to check the engines. The nose-wrinkling smell of a burned connection made him grimace. Wonder whether I should use the backup hyperdrive unit instead? But the backup was much slower, and he had no way of knowing how serious Muurgh's condition was. Han decided to chance using the main hyperdrive engine. He held his breath as he initiated the jump to hyperspace. From the way the ship hesitated, and the laboring sound of the engine, he started to sweat. The dream strained, shuddered, but the stars suddenly blazed at him in streaks, and they jumped. Han came out of hyperspace a short time later, thanking his lucky stars that the Elysian dream had held together for that hop. The ship's light-speed engines definitely needed repairs. The Corellian headed into the star system he'd chosen, toward the soul-inhabited world. While he was still fairly far out, he placed the dream on autopilot and went back to check the box of glitter stim. The world he'd chosen was known to have customs and spice checks, so he opened up the secret compartment the priests had built into the cargo deck and removed the boxes of Dorinian ambergris perfume that he carried as a cover cargo. Grunting with effort, Han lugged the heavy containers of perfume into the cargo bay and put them down. Then he placed the much smaller container of glitter stim vials in the concealed compartment, making sure it sealed shut. Unless someone knew it was there, he'd never spot it, and the hatch was designed to be scanner-proof. By the time Han returned to his pilot's seat, the world he'd chosen was growing in his view screens. As he approached, he saw it was a lovely world, hanging blue and white and tan against the night blackness of space. As he swooped toward it, Han suddenly remembered that he'd shut down his communications system after sending off the message to Elysia. Better turn it back on, he thought, check in with the Spaceport Authority and get clearance to land. He glanced back at Muurgh, who hadn't stirred or made a sound. And arrange for transport to the nearest hospital. As his fingers clicked on the comm unit, the vid screen filled with an image of a kindly-looking man with a little dark-haired girl sitting on his lap. Han was startled, then realized that this message was pre-recorded, and played to every ship on an approach vector. A voiceover identified the man, His Majesty, Bail Prester Organa, Viceroy and First Chairman. The man smiled into the screen. Greetings. On behalf of myself and my people, I bid you welcome to Alderaan. Chapter 6. Alderaan and Back Again. Han listened with half his attention as the man, King somebody or other, did they say, continued with the vid message. As many of our visitors are already aware, Alderaan is a peaceful world, a world where we have eschewed weapons and their use. While you are our guest, we ask that you respect our traditions and our laws, by leaving your weapons with the Port Authority during your stay here. You will find that Alderaan has much to offer a visitor. We have almost no crime. Right, Han thought. I'll just bet. And no pollution. Our lakes are clear, our air is pure, and our people are happy. We have wonderful museums, and we invite you to visit them. Be sure not to miss our grass paintings as you fly over them on your landing approach. Our grass painters are among the greatest artists in the galaxy. We welcome visitors to our beautiful world, and we ask only that you come in peace, and that you obey our, with a muttered curse, Han leaned over and snapped the audio portion of the broadcast off. He made a rude gesture at the screen. A whole planet full of honest citizens. I'll believe it when I see it. Minutes later, Bail Organa's canned message was replaced by a live traffic controller from the Port Authority. Han snapped the audio back on. Captain Drago, piloting the Elysian Dream, he said crisply. Request permission to land. I was attacked by pirates, my ship is damaged, and I've got an injured gunner. Can you arrange for Medlift to meet my ship as soon as I land? Certainly, Captain Drago. I've assigned you a priority approach vector. We're slotting you in at docking bay 422. Just follow the landing beacon to your site. We'll have a transport and med droid standing by. Thanks. Han's approach vector did indeed take him over the grass paintings, and distracted as he was, he couldn't help but be impressed. The huge plain of wind-blown flowing grass boasted a kilometers-wide abstract design picked out in multicolored wildflowers. Neat trick, he thought. Wonder how they do it. And why they bother. It's not like you could sell art like that and make money off it. The capital city of Alderaan, Aldera, was located on an island in the middle of a lake. The site of the lake was actually a meteor crater that had filled with water from underground springs. The remains of the huge, relatively recent, in geological terms at least, crater surrounded the lake in a series of low jagged foothills whose sides were splashed with green fields and forests. The water filling the millennia-old crater sparkled brilliant ice blue in the early morning rays of sun. The spaceport was on the far side of the island, and Han swooped low over the city on his assigned approach vector. In just minutes he was bringing the Elysian Dream down for a perfect landing. He'd now had so much experience landing despite massive storms and vicious air currents that landing a ship on a normal planet seemed like child's play. The medical unit was waiting, as promised. Han quickly unbuckled Muurgh's blaster and stowed it away, then he brought the med droid with the anti-grav stretcher on board, and helped load Muurgh onto it. "Do you think he'll be okay?" he asked the attending droid. "My preliminary scan indicates that there is no life-threatening trauma as a result of the head injury," the droid replied. "However, we will need to run further tests. I would anticipate that your crew member will require an overnight stay in our facility." "Okay," Han said. "I've got to figure out some way to pay for Muurgh's treatment," he thought as he watched the stretcher bearing the Togorian vanish inside the transport, which promptly lifted off and headed south. Seeing a technician going by, Han waved the woman over. "Listen, I've sustained some damage," he said. "Can I get a repair crew in here right away?" "Let me see how bad it is," she said. Han guided her into the gunner's mount, then into the engine room to check out the hyperdrive. "Both jobs will require at least 6 hours work to fix," she told him. "But we can start on it today." "Good," Han said. He had done minor swoop and speeder repairs while he was a racer, but he'd never tackled anything as big as this, and he wanted to make sure the job was done right. As the repair crew came aboard the Dream, Han wondered what he should do next. Call Elysia, he decided. The priests were going to have to arrange for payment for the repairs and Muurgh's treatment. Han headed for the control cabin, intending to place the call immediately. His hand was actually on the switch when he suddenly froze. "Wait a minute," he thought. "What am I doing? I'm sitting here with a load of glitter stim, the most valuable spice of all, and I'm just going to take it back to Elysia so they can sell it again." Han checked back in his automatic log recordings, listened to what he'd said during his transmission. He grinned to himself. "This is a piece of cake. All I have to do is tell the priests that I was boarded and the pirates took the glitter stim. Muurgh was out cold, he doesn't know what happened. I can sell this spice here on Alderaan, stash the money in an account here, then send for it later. They'll never know." But if he wanted to keep his job as a pilot for the Elysian priests, he'd have to make a deal fast. He'd reported himself at the rendezvous coordinates, and the priests weren't stupid. They could check on how long it would take a ship to get from where he'd been attacked to Alderaan. He could account for a few extra hours by pointing to the damage the Dream had sustained and pleading the slowness of the journey, the need to nurse the ship along. Okay, Han thought. I've got about 5 hours I can fudge here, no more. By that time I've got to call in and let them know I'm alive, that their ship is damaged, and that they have to arrange for payment. Any more time than that, and they'll get suspicious. Pulling his battered brown lizard hide jacket out of his locker, Han straightened his worn pilot's coverall as best he could. Then he combed his hair. Don't want to look scruffy, he thought wryly, thinking of Dulana and how the Wookiee had always told him he looked good with his hair standing straight up, like one of her own people. Pulling on the jacket over the gray uniform, he stared regretfully at Muurgh's blaster, wishing he could strap it on. Stupid planet. Whoever heard of a world with no weapons allowed? With a sigh and a shake of his head, Han left the Elysian Dream to the repair crews. He walked quickly to the entrance to the spaceport, then caught one of the free shuttles that led into the capital city of Aldera. The metropolis glittered white in the sunshine, as clean and luxurious as a city in a dream. Han stared out the windows of the shuttle, taking in the ultramodern towers, domes, and layered buildings, their white shapes interspersed with green terraces. The island was hilly, and the city architects had followed the natural lines of the place rather than leveling it. The result was pleasant and varied to the eyes, beautiful and modern, without seeming harsh or artificial. The automated shuttle's CAN program indicated points of interest as they passed. Han saw museums, gigantic enclosed gallerias, office and government buildings, and finally, as they approached the heart of the city, he saw the tall, sharp spires and shallow domes of the royal palace gleaming white and gold in the sun. Han smiled wryly, wondered if the child princess he'd seen was somewhere on those grounds, living her rich, perfect life. With any luck, I'll soon be rich too. Han stayed aboard the transport as it glided along its route, and he continued scoping out the city. They were out of the big buildings now, and heading through the residential suburbs. Han had to admit that it looked like a nice place to live, as he gazed at the many fountain plazas and courtyards, the affluent homes, clean streets, and the well-dressed people they passed. But this isn't the area I want. I'd better do some exploring on my own. They don't want tourists to see the places I want to go. After the shuttle let him off, Han walked around the central part of the city, checking out the lay of the land. Instinctively, he headed for an area where the houses were smaller and not as well maintained. Finally, in a neighborhood that was definitely lower income, and boasted more than one tavern and hawk shop, he realized he'd come to the right place. Han scanned the streets as he walked, looking for a particular type of individual. Finally, he spotted what he was looking for. A boy dressed in clothes that were borderline too small, ragged, and not very clean was sauntering along the street, glancing oh so casually at each passerby. Han recognized the child, though he'd never seen him before. A pickpocket. 10 years ago, he'd been that child. Han increased the length of his strides until he caught up with the boy. As expected, the lad shifted his weight and altered stride to brush against Han as the Corellian walked past him. Also expected were the lightning-fast fingers that delved deep into the pilot's jacket pocket. The fingers came away empty. Han's ID and the few credits he was carrying were sealed into the inside pocket of his coverall. Han lengthened his strides until he was ahead of the boy, then without warning, he spun on his heel and confronted the child. "Hey there," he said, smiling pleasantly and holding up the boy's ID disc and money. "Lose something?" The boy's mouth dropped open in amazement, then he recovered himself and glared at Han, his black eyes smoldering. Han leaned casually against a storefront. "Careless of you to lose these things." The boy swelled up like a poison Relfa lizard, then launched into a furious and detailed description of Han's ancestry, personal habits, and probable destination. Han listened patiently until the urchin began to sputter and repeat himself, then he waved for silence. "I'll give em back," he said genially, in exchange for some information. The boy glared sullenly, tossing his overlong hair back out of his eyes. "What kind of information, you son of a diseased pervert?" Han tossed one of the credit coins into the air, caught it effortlessly, without looking. "Watch your mouth, Junior. I just want to know where in this town people go to make deals." "What kind of deals?" "You know what kind of deals. Deals for substances you can't buy legally." "Spice?" the boy frowned. "What kind?" "Glitter stim." The boy's brow creased even farther. "What's that?" "Just my luck," Han thought. "I run into the only dumb pickpocket in Aldera." "Great. Glitter stim," Han said. Well, it's really valuable. Even more so than carcinum or andrus." The boy shook his head again. "Never heard of them either." "I don't believe this." "What about andrus?" "You got andrus here?" "Used to flavor food, preserve it." The kid nodded. "Yeah. Andrus. We got that. Expensive stuff." "Right," Han said. "When you buy andrus, who do you buy it from?" "I don't buy it, creep," the boy said. "Now gimme back my money and ID." "Just a second, be patient," Han said, holding the items up, safely out of the boy's reach. "So, okay, you don't buy andrus personally. But if you or your friends wanted some, how would they get it? Buy it in a store? Or a government agency?" The boy's expression was eloquent as he shook his head. "No, a man. We'd buy it from Darak Leal." At last. A name. That's what I wanted. Darak Leal. What's he look like? Taller than you. Long hair, beard, fat around his middle. Old or young? Old, gray hair. Where's he hang out? Han asked. Do I look like his keeper? The pickpocket demanded scornfully. Han took a deep breath. Just tell me the names of any places where he might go on a typical day. Don't lie, or I'll swear out a complaint that you tried to rob me. The boy named 6 taverns, telling Han that they were all within a 5-minute walk. Han straightened up and flipped the boy his ID and money. Next time keep it inside your clothes, Junior, he said. Next to your skin. He patted his own money and gave the lad a smug smile. The lad snarled at Han and walked away cursing. Alderanian taverns were much too clean and well lit, Han decided, an hour later. He'd been to 3 of the 6 so far, and none of them appeared seamy enough for his purposes. No sign of Darak Leal either. At one place he'd glimpsed a man in the back slide something to another under cover of his arm, and then receive a credit disc slipped to him just as clandestinely. Han had waited until the first man had gotten up to use the refresher unit, then he'd followed him. When the man came out, Han was waiting for him in the dim hallway. Like a word with you, pal, he said. The dealer, a small, sharp-faced man who reminded Han of a Ranat, eyed the Corellian suspiciously, then evidently decided Han offered no threat. Yeah. What about? You deal in spice? The man hesitated for a long moment. How much you want? No, pal, I'm selling, not buying. You interested? What you got? Glitter stim. 100 vials. Glitter stim. The man's voice scaled up, then he hastily lowered it and stepped closer. Where'd you get that, son? I'm not your son, and it's none of your business where I got it. You interested? On any other world than this one, better believe I'd be interested, but... The man shook his head. No. No channels to unload it. I'd have to try and smuggle it off-world, and that's too risky. They'd send me to the mines on Kessel to dig out the infernal stuff. Glitter stim can be dangerous, you know. Make you blind, if you take too much. Drives Biths mad, you know. I know all that, Han said impatiently. Thanks for nothing, pal. Scowling, he stalked out of the tavern. He finally ran down Derak Leal in the 5th tavern he visited. Han recognized the man from the pickpocket's description. Leal was playing sabacc, and when he saw Han standing there, watching the game, he cordially waved the young Corellian over. Care to sit in for a hand? Han had played sabacc before, but that wasn't what he'd come here for. He stared directly at Derak Leal and raised his eyebrows. All depends on what you'll accept for a stake, Leal. The man's expression didn't change a whit as he glanced casually up. You got something good, pilot? Might. Well, the ante is 20 credits. Han shook his head. Changed my mind. Going out to get some fresh air. He stood outside, leaning against the alley wall, for about 5 minutes. When he heard someone approaching, Han said, without looking, took you long enough. Must have been winning. Idiot's array, Leal said, using the sabacc player's term for a top-notch winning hand. So what do you got? Han turned to look at the man. Glitter stim. 100 vials. Woo, Derak Leal whistled in amazement. Where'd you come by that? None of your business, Han said. Want it? Give you a good price. Wish I could, young fellow, wish I could, Leal said, sounding regretful. But I'd be a fool to take it. Just no market here on Alderaan. Han cursed under his breath and turned away. What am I going to do, he wondered. His time was definitely running out. Maybe he should hop an intercontinental shuttle to some other city. Maybe it was only Alderaan that was so preternaturally clean on this world. Han sighed. I don't have time. I either sell that stuff in an hour, or a hand fell on his shoulder. It took every bit of self-control Han possessed not to yell and bolt, he was so keyed up. Instead he just turned and glared at the middle-aged, dark-skinned man who'd fallen into step with him. I think you've mistaken me for someone else, he said evenly. I don't think so, Vic, the man said. Pilot Vic Drago, out of Ilesia, right? So what? Han said. I don't know you. Marsden Latham, the man said, flashing a hollow ID badge under Han's nose. Alderaanian Internal Security Force. Oh no. We've been keeping an eye on you, Pilot Drago, ever since you limped in here this morning. We're happy we can help you out with repairs and fix up your partner. You saw that message when you first came within frequency range of Alderaan? I saw it. Well, it's meant to be taken seriously. We don't like trouble here. The man smiled suddenly, showing very even, very white teeth. You wouldn't be out to cause us any trouble, would you, pilot? Han strove to keep his face impassive. They know that I've been trying to cut a deal, must have been watching me all morning. Silently, he cursed the official. Aloud, he said, Course not, sir. I'm a peace-loving kinda guy. I told my chief that, and I'm glad to have my impression confirmed. Nice talking to you, Pilot Drago. Enjoy your stay on Alderaan. The man's strides came faster and longer then, and he walked away from Han up the street. The Corellian forced himself to keep walking slowly, forced himself not to glance behind him. They were there, no doubt, shadowing him. The game was over, and he was busted. Scowling, Han shook his head, half in disgust, half in admiration. Those security operatives must be good. He'd had no idea they'd been tailing him. Obviously, the man's talk had been a not-so-veiled warning to stop trying to sell his cargo. He'd have to take it back to Ilesia. There weren't any other planets close enough to reach so he could make the sale. He checked the time, discovered he just had time to get out to check on Muir before he'd have to call back to Ilesia. Han's strides came faster as he headed for the nearest public transport station. The university medical facility where the Tagorian had been taken was attached to the University of Alderaan campus. Han swung down from the repulsor lift public transport and stood looking around for a moment. Nice, he thought, real nice. For a moment he wondered if the academy would look anything like this. Probably not, he concluded. It's a military establishment. It'll look more like a base, I'll bet, but this is real classy. Green and blue lawns stretched across the central quadrangle. Flower beds made bright splashes of color and surrounded the huge central fountain. At the center of the fountain was a massive sculpture carved from living ice of a young Alderaanian man and woman standing with linked hands, reaching for the skies. Hey, that's got to be worth a barrel of credits, Han thought, eyeing the sculpture and realizing it must be a priceless work of art. Definitely a classy joint, Han decided, as he walked past the huge fountain and continued up the impressive white stone stairs to the medical facility. The info droid at the front desk gave him the number of the Tagorian's room. Han hurried down the corridors, then, outside, paused to speak to the medical droid. Your friend sustained a severe blow to the cranium, the droid said. It would probably have killed a humanoid. Fortunately, Tagorians have very dense bone matter, and so he is relatively uninjured. We have been quick healing him since he came here, and he should be ready to leave by tomorrow morning. Thanks, Han said, opening the door and going in. Muir lay curled on a large round pallet. The Tagorian was covered with tiny sensor units that reported on his condition. As Han entered, the blue eyes opened. Muir raised himself partly up. Pilot. Hey, how are you doing, pal? Han was surprised to feel a huge wash of relief when he saw the Tagorian conscious and lucid again. He hadn't realized he'd gotten so fond of the big felinoid. They treating you all right? Pilot. Muir seemed utterly amazed to find Han here. You look surprised to see me, Han said. That was a huge understatement. Muir didn't look surprised, he looked flabbergasted. Muir-gith. The big alien shook his furry head a little dizzily. I mean, I am. I never thought I would see you again. Han drew himself up. Why not? Did you think I'd just dump you here and swipe the cargo? Yeth, replied Muir simply. Well, I'm here, ain't I? If it wasn't for me hauling us into Alderaanian space by the skin of our noses, you'd be dead meat by now. I suggest you remember that, pal. You owe me. Muir nodded dazedly. Yeth, pilot. I owe you. Han scowled at him and sat down on the edge of the pallet. And skip that, pilot, formality. I'm Vic from now on, okay? Muir put out a paw, laid it gently over Han's arm, the huge clawed fingers with their now retracted claws dwarfing the human's limb. Okay, Vic. After Han left Muir to the tender ministrations of the medical droids, he went back to the dream and called Ilesia. Teroenza was not available, so he asked to speak to Veritil. When the Ilesia's horned, bloated visage appeared on the screen, Han gave him an abbreviated account of their adventures, promising to start back to Ilesia the following day. Veritil, in his turn, promised to arrange payment for the ship repairs and Muir's treatment. When he'd finished with his call, Han found that he was hungry, so after checking his small hoard of credits, he headed over to a combination tavern and eatery on the campus of the University of Alderaan. It was set into a secluded courtyard, and a rainbow-colored fountain sent showers of crystal drops into the air before the entrance. Han pulled the door open and went in. The tavern was filled with fashionably dressed young people, talking, laughing, drinking and eating. Han hesitated, feeling suddenly self-conscious, but his natural bravado came to his rescue. "I'm just as good as they are," he thought defiantly, following the serving droid to a small table. Despite his brave front, the young Corellian was uncomfortably conscious of the way his sweat-stained coverall and battered jacket contrasted with the elegant, trendy garb of the students who chattered and laughed at the tables. Once seated, Han ordered an Alderaanian ale. Studying the menu, he noticed that the place featured Nerf cubes and tubers in wine sauce, for a special. It was a little pricey, but he ordered it anyway, knowing that Nerf was said to be a delicacy. The stew came with a plate of flatbread, which made him think of Pilgrim 921. Wish she were here, he thought. It'd be nice to have someone to talk to. Dipping a square of flatbread into the dish, he tasted, chewed, then smiled. This is really good. It had been a long, long time since he'd had really good food. Denizens of Trader's Luck frequently existed on space rations during their voyages. The only times Han had eaten really well was when he'd been playing his part in one of Garrus Shrike's scams. He remembered one barbecue he'd gone to on Corellia. Tralodon ribs with special sauce. But even barbecued Tralodon ribs couldn't equal Nerf, he decided. Hungrily, Han dug into his meal. When he was about halfway through, a pretty girl with long, curly chestnut hair and bright blue eyes walked up onto the tiny stage, carrying a mandoviol. Seating herself on a stool, she began to strum it, then, a moment later, her voice rang out, clear and true, in what was evidently a traditional Alderaanian ballad. It was the usual stuff, about a girl who lost her lover to the lure of the space lanes, and how she waited but he never came home. The singer's voice was so pure, so unaffected, that she lent the cliched words true emotion and dignity. When she'd finished, Han, along with the other patrons, clapped enthusiastically. The girl sang another song, then stepped down off the stage and walked straight toward Han. For a moment he hoped that she was coming over to sit with him, but no such luck. She slid into a seat at the next table. Since the tavern was evidently a popular hangout, the tables were crowded close together. The girl wound up sitting within arm's length of Han. The other person at the table was a round-faced young man a year or two older than the pilot. Probably her boyfriend, Han thought, covertly eyeing the young man. He had light brown hair and pale, hazel-green eyes. Unlike the girl, who wore a simple, ankle-length blue dress and sandals, her escort was a tribute to modern fashion. His purple tunic was belted with a wide, orange belt that clashed with his knee-high red boots. His yellow breeches clung to his legs like a second skin. Han, in his worn, gray coverall, felt like a house warbler next to a paradise bird. As the singer shook back her hair and smiled triumphantly, Han managed to catch her eye. He mimed clapping, and she grinned and bowed. "You were great," he told her. "Thank you," she said. "That was the first time I've gotten up my nerve to sing in front of a crowd." The girl was flushed, breathless, and very charming. Han smiled back at her. "I wouldn't mind spending the evening, and the night, with her." Aloud, he said, "We're a very lucky audience then. Witnessing the beginning of a great career." "Thank you." She held out her hand. "I'm a Rin Dro, and this is Born Thul." Han took her hand and instead of shaking it, bowed over it, as though she were Karelian nobility. His lips didn't touch the back of her hand, but he came close enough so she could feel the warmth of his breath on her skin. "I'm honored, Arin," he said. "Vic Drago." When he released her hand and turned to greet her escort, Han could tell the young man was irked, and making no effort to hide it. "Greetings," Han said, since he wasn't sure what honorific, if any, was proper on Alderaan. "Greetings," Thul said. "Arin, you were magnificent. Would you care to go somewhere else to celebrate your triumph?" "Can't stand competition," Han thought, smothering a mischievous grin. He too had seen Arin's blue eyes light up when he'd introduced himself. "Listen, I won't intrude," he said, flashing his most charming smile at the singer. "I just had to tell you how much I enjoyed your singing. But I won't take up any more of your time." Thul looked as though he'd have liked to say, "Good," but didn't quite dare. Arin shook her head and put a reassuring hand on Han's arm. "Oh no, of course you're not intruding, Vic." She eyed his coverall. "I was going to ask you if you went to school here, but you don't, do you?" Han shook his head. "No, I'm only here for tonight. Flew in this morning for repairs. Got in a fight with some pirates and damaged my ship." The wide blue eyes grew even wider. "Flew? Pirates? Are you a star pilot?" Han shrugged modestly. "Yeah." Bornin Thul was getting hot under the collar, the Karelian noted. "Doesn't like the idea of his girl talking to a working-class guy like me, the stuck-up so-and-so. Well, tough, brother Bornin." "Oh my," Arin breathed. "That's so exciting. Real pirates, what happened?" Han shrugged again. "Came out of hyperspace, and they were on me quicker than stink on a skeeg. 2 of them. Blasted one, but between them, they damaged my hyperdrive. So I came on to Alderaan for repairs." "You blasted one?" Bornin demanded sharply, raising a skeptical eyebrow. "With what?" "With an Arakid missile, pal," Han said evenly. "I blew his but into little bitty pieces." Arin shivered, half with excitement, half with distress. "That sounds really scary." Han took a swallow of ale. "All in a day's work," he said, deliberately laconic. By this time Bornin had had just about enough. His face reddened, and he grabbed Arin's arm. "Sweetheart, let's go. I'm taking you out to the best place in town. If you'll excuse us. Pilot Drago." The girl hesitated for a long moment. "I could get her," Han thought. "I know I could. That'd really stick in this upper-class jerk's craw too, to have me walk out of here with his girl." For a moment Han was tempted, then he made himself relax and relinquish the contest. He sensed that Arin was a really nice girl, someone who didn't deserve to be treated like a gaming piece so he could score points off her snotty boyfriend. One of the reasons he found her attractive, Han realized, was that she reminded him a little of 921, with her wide blue eyes and sweet smile. Besides, he thought, those security guys are probably still tailing me. Old Bornin here might just be man enough to pick a fight, and if they're still around, that could get messy. So Han stood, respectfully, and gave Arin a formal bow. "Been a real pleasure," he said. "Enjoy your celebration." "Thank you," she said, and gave him a last quick smile before she allowed Bornin to lead her out. Han sat back down to his cooling food, reflecting that this incident had reminded him of just how much he detested stuck-up rich people. He'd encountered lots of them on Karelia, while working Shrike scams, and the fact that most of them weren't worth a blaster bolt to blow them to atoms was the only thing that made him able to act his part during the swindles. By the time Han returned to the Elysian dream, and the tiny bunk that had been installed in part of the cargo area for him, he was slightly the worse for the Alderanian ale. Thoughts of 921 kept running through his mind, and he cursed aloud in the silence, wishing he could stop thinking about her. Han had never before encountered a woman that he'd spent time thinking about when she wasn't with him. The knowledge that 921 had wormed her way that deep into his mind unsettled Han, made him uncomfortable. She's just a girl solo. You don't even know her blasted name. Quit mooning around like this. You going soft in the head or something? Han flung himself down on his bunk and groaned aloud, remembering the events of the day. What a world, he thought muzzily. So goody-goody that a guy can't even sell a perfectly good cargo of spice. The trip back to Ilesia was uneventful. Han piloted the Dream down through the clouds without a single mishap, and hardly even shook the ship as he did it. Even Muirg, who was still nursing a headache, couldn't complain. It was becoming second nature to Han to see, analyze, and avoid the paths of the planet's massive storm systems. The moment the ship was down on the landing pad, Han's communicator came to life, summoning him to meet with Teroenza immediately. Han had been expecting this. He sent Muirg off to the infirmary to get some treatment for his headache, and walked up to the administration building alone. This time he was met by Ganner Taz and escorted into the High Priest's inner sanctum, where he'd been before. Teroenza was resting in a most unusual piece of furniture, a sort of sling or hammock that allowed the High Priest to lean back on his massive haunches and take his weight off his back legs. His thick forelegs were supported by a movable padded leg rest that could swing in and out to allow him to get into the contraption. The minute the High Priest saw Han, his expression, which Han was beginning to be able to read, turned positively benevolent. "Pilot Drago," he boomed. "I understand you are a hero. Your bravery and courage are beyond price, but I have ordered a bonus to be placed in your account." Han blinked, then smiled. "Thanks, sir. We have lost 2 ships that failed to return from their rendezvous points over the past year and a half," Teroenza continued. "You are the first pilot to get a look at your attackers and return to tell us who they were. What did you see?" Han shrugged. "Well, it all happened real fast, and I was kinda busy, sir. But I'm pretty sure that the ship I destroyed was a Drell-built ship. Looked like it. That chisel-shaped prow and stubby stern are pretty distinctive. Did they communicate with you? Give you a chance to surrender before attacking?" "No, they shot first, and just kept on shooting. They weren't trying to destroy the Dream, because if they had been, they'd have done it. But they had no interest in the ship, which was strange. Most pirates would try to disable the ship enough to take it, while leaving it easy to repair so they could use it or sell it. These guys were out to cripple the Dream, and kill me and Muirg." "How did they attack?" "From behind. They could have nailed us before we even knew they were there. They had at least 2 clear shots, and the shielding on the Dream isn't that good." As he remembered the battle, Han took a deep breath. "I think we need to strengthen the shielding, sir." "I will order that to be done, pilot," Teroenza agreed. The huge T-Landatil folded his tiny arms, and his massive forehead wrinkled as he considered what Han had told him. "Interesting that they attacked first, without engaging a tractor beam and attempting to gain your surrender." "Yeah, that's what I thought." Han had known several traders aboard the Luck that had spent time on pirate crews, and had listened to them bragging about their adventures. A straight-out attack wasn't the usual pirate style. It would have been more typical for a deep space pirate to fire a warning shot, then, after the pilot had surrendered, board the ship. "It's funny, it's like they planned to disable the Dream, probably killing me and Muirg in the process, and then board her when she was dead in space." No communication or demand for surrender at all. None, Han affirmed. Teroenza smoothed the loose folds of flesh beneath his chin thoughtfully. Almost as though they were willing to risk destroying the dream and her cargo rather than communicate with you. Yeah, I'd say so. How close were you to the rendezvous point when you were attacked? We'd come out of hyperspace less than 5 minutes before. No doubt, sir, they were waiting for us. They knew we were coming. Had you made any transmissions referring to your course or coordinates, Pilot Drago? No, sir. As instructed, I maintained strict silence on all frequencies. Teroenza rumbled thoughtfully, deep in his chest, then nodded his massive horned head. Again, I commend your bravery. How is Murg? He'll be okay. Took a hard blow to the head though. I will want to speak to him when he is well enough. Very well, pilot, you are dismissed. Han stood his ground. Sir. I'd like to ask a favor. Yes. My blaster was taken from me when I arrived on Ilesia. I'd like it returned. If there's any chance I might be boarded by pirates sometime in the future, I want to be able to shoot back. Teroenza considered for a moment, then nodded agreement. I will order your weapon returned to you, pilot. You have certainly demonstrated your loyalty and earned our trust by your actions these last few days. The huge being waved a small hand. Tell me, Pilot Drago, did it never occur to you to attempt to sell your cargo and tell us it had been stolen by the pirates? Han shook his head. No, sir, it didn't, he said earnestly. Very good. I am impressed. Teroenza's wide, lipless mouth curved up in what was evidently meant as a smile of approval. Most impressed. Han walked out of the administration building, thankful that he'd been able to lie convincingly since he was 7. He was especially proud of his ability to fabricate on a moment's notice. His footsteps took him down the path toward the infirmary. Time to check up on Murg, see how the Tagorian was doing. Also, it was time to meet Jalis Nebel, the Celestin pilot who'd been placed on sick leave. Han had a few questions to ask the Celestin. Chapter 7. Bria. Murg was lying curled up on one of the large pallets his species used as beds. Han walked over to the Tagorian and sat down beside him. How's the head? My head still hurts, Murg said. The medical droid thaith I must stay here tonight. But I told him no, I could not do that, Bekoth Vic might need me. No, I'm fine, Han assured the big felinoid. I'm going to visit the Celestin, eat dinner, do a few sims and engage in a little target practice. Then I'm gonna turn in early. It's been a long day. Did Vic tell Teroenza about the pirates? Yeah, I did. He's gonna want to talk to you when you're up to it. And, good news. Teroenza's giving me my blaster back. Good, Murg said. Vic needs to protect himself from pirates. That's what I pointed out, pal. Han stood up. Listen, I'm going next door, talk to the other pilot. I'll check back on you tomorrow morning, okay? Murg stretched luxuriously, then curled up on his pallet, looking almost like a huge black furry circle. Okay, Vic. Han walked down the corridor until he found the medical droid, then he asked to be guided to the Celestin pilot's room. Once he reached it, Han signaled the door chime and a moment later heard a voice say in Celestin, "Enter." Han opened the door, only to be met by a wall of forced air that covered the doorway like a curtain. Han had to step through the doorway, into cool refreshing air. The door sealed shut behind him with a hiss. Canned air, Han realized. They've got the Celestin on a recirculating air system, so he's not breathing Elysian air. Wonder why? Jalis Nebel was sitting before an entertainment vid unit where a galactic news documentary was in progress. Han walked over and offered his hand to the big-eyed, droopy-jowled being. "Hi, I'm Vic Drago, the new pilot. Pleased to meet you." He spoke in basic, hoping the alien understood it. The jolly alien nodded at Han and said in his own rapid-fire shrill language, "Do you understand the tongue of my people, or shall we require a translator to converse?" "I understand it," Han said in extremely halting Celestin, "but speak it only bad." "Understand basic you okay?" "Yes," the Celestin said. "I understand basic quite well." "Good," Han said, reverting back to his own tongue. "Mind if I sit down?" "Please do so," the pilot answered. "I have been wishing to speak with you for some time, but I have been quite ill and, as you can see, confined to these few rooms where the air is specially filtered for me." Han sat down on a low bench and looked closely at the alien. He couldn't see any outward damage. "That's too bad, pal. What happened? Overwork?" The Celestin's small wet mouth pursed unhappily. "Too many missions, yes. Too many storms I flew through. Too many almost crashes, my friend. One day I awoke, and my hands," the Celestin held out his small delicate hands with their narrow oval claw nails. "My hands would not stop trembling. I could no longer handle the controls of my ship." The alien's already mournful expression grew even sadder. Han almost expected to see tears well up in those big already wet eyes. Han looked at the alien's hands and saw that they were indeed shaking uncontrollably. He felt a mixture of dismay and pity. Poor guy. That'd be awful. "That's a bum deal, pal," he said. "Was it just, your nerve being shot or what?" "Pressure, yes," the Celestin agreed. "Too many missions, little rest, over and over. Too many storms. But also, too much hauling of glitter stim. Medical droid says I have bad reaction to it. Makes Jalis Nebel very sick indeed." Han shifted uncomfortably on the bench. "You mean you're allergic to glitter stim?" "Yes. Discovered this as soon as I began hauling it, and tried to stay away from it, but it is in the very air of this world. Even locked in those vials, tiny traces escape to the air. When Jalis Nebel breathes it in, over days, weeks, more than a planet year, causes bad effects. Muscle tremors. Slowed reflexes. Stomach is upset, breathing grows hard. So that's why they've got you confined to the infirmary, with these filters running," Han said. "Trying to get it out of your system." "Correct. I want to fly again, friend and fellow pilot Drago. You are one of few who can understand this, correct?" Han thought of how he'd feel if he couldn't fly anymore, if he'd been so overworked and poisoned by spice exposure that his hands shook all the time, and he nodded. "Hey pal," he said sincerely, "I'm really sorry. I hope you'll be better soon." He lowered his voice, and switched to trader's argot. "Understand you trader talk, friend?" The Celestin nodded. "Not speak," he replied, equally softly, "but understand fine." Han glanced up at the ceiling. Were the Elysians or their security monitoring this room? No way to be sure. But he hadn't met too many droids who could translate trader's argot, because it was a bastardized mix of a dozen or more tongues and several dialects, with no fixed syntax. He waved up the volume on the newscast higher, then mouthed, barely making any sound, "Friend pilot, when hands grow steady, then if me you, not say farewell, just fly off bad spice world, quick quick." Understand? The Celestin nodded. Han lowered the volume slightly, then went on, as if nothing had happened. I got attacked by pirates the other day. The Celestin leaned forward. What happened? They shot up my ship, damaged the hyperdrive engines, but I managed to get one of them with a missile, Han said, gesturing, boom, with his hands. Had to put into Alderaan for repairs. Ever been there? Nice world, the Celestin commented dryly. Too nice for some things. Tell me about it, Han said with feeling. Anyway, when I came back here, Teroenza had 100 questions about what kinds of ships the pirates were in, why they didn't fire warning shots or try to commandeer the Dream, stuff like that. I got the distinct impression that there was more to this attack than just a random pirate raid. For one thing, they were waiting for me at the rendezvous point. How'd they find out those coordinates? Ah, said Jaelus Nebel. There may indeed be much behind this attack, pilot. Please, call me Vic. Us pilots gotta stick together. You call me Nebel then. My nest name. Thanks. So what do you think is going on? I believe that the Tlandatil are worried that these pirate vessels may instead be from Nal Hutta. Hut dispatched ships, masquerading as pirates. Han whistled softly. By all the minions of Zender, that takes the cake. The Huts are fighting against each other. Is not hard to believe if you have ever spent time among Huts, Nebel said dryly. Hut alliances are made and broken on the spin of a credit coin. Hut loyalty melts away in the face of loss of profit or power, you know. I'm beginning to see a pattern here, Han said, shifting uneasily on the hard bench, thinking of how close he'd come to being cosmic dust. There are factions of Huts on Nal Hutta. Oh yes. One family or clan will gain power and wealth, only to fall when another family plots their demise. It is no wonder that Huts are the most distrustful of sentients. Being a food taster for a Hut is most likely a job of short duration, Vic. It is very difficult to poison a Hut, but that does not stop assassins from trying it and occasionally, succeeding. And the clans are not above using missiles, assassins, or ground troops to accomplish their goals. But the Huts are the ones who are really running this place, Han pointed out. Ah. You saw Zaval then? If that's the bloated son of a gun who rides around on that repulsor sled, I sure did. Haven't had the honor yet of meeting him face to face. Pray you never do, Vic. Zaval, like most Huts, is not easy to please. The priests can be hard masters to satisfy, but compared to the Huts, their masters, they are nothing. So, what's going on with this world? You've got Huts running this world who are clashing with other clans of Huts on Nal Hutta. Why? Han thought for a moment, then answered his own question. Oh. Of course, for the spice. Naturally. The Huts and the Tlandatil, their caretakers, profit in two ways from Ilesia. First, there is the processed spice. But the Ilesian Huts must buy their spice from other Hut families who provide the raw materials. Have you ever heard of Gileak or of Jabba? Jabba? Han frowned. Jabba the Hutt? I think I've heard of him. Isn't he supposed to be the guy who pretty much controls Nar Shaddaa, the smuggler's moon that orbits Nal Hutta? That's right. He divides his time between his home on Nal Hutta and a spice transshipping operation he runs through a backup beyond planet called Tatooine. Tatooine? Never heard of it. Nebel shuddered. Trust me, you don't want to go there. It's a dump. I'll keep that in mind. So this Jabba and Gileak get the raw spice and ship it here for processing, right? Yes. But lately, I believe, they may be trying to increase their profit by sending out ships to masquerade as pirates, and having them hijack the Ilesian spice ships. That way, Jabba and Gilliac get the processed spice for nothing, something that would please them greatly. Han pursed his lips in a silent whistle. Talk about biting the hand that feeds you. Indeed. Yet I have no difficulty believing them capable of doing it. Han ran a hand through his hair and sighed. It had been a very long day. Yeah, from what I've heard, a Hutt would sell his own grandmother, assuming they have such things, for a credit's profit. So you must be very, very cautious, young Vic. Tell Teroenza you need increased shielding. I have. Good. Greater firepower would not be amiss either. Yeah, you're right. Han fixed the Celestin with a steady gaze. Nebel, since we're talkin' frankly here, tell me something. There ain't nothin' to this religion thing the priests are pushing at these pilgrims, is there? I do not believe so, Vic. But I do not understand exactly what the exaltation is. I am not a believer, so I have never felt it, but judging by the way the pilgrims react, it has a more intoxicating effect than any dose of spice. Yeah, it packs a wallop all right, Han agreed. What I'm figuring is that this whole setup on Ilesia is just one big scam to get their lousy spice processed cheap. That is not their only motive, Vic. Do you remember that I said there were two ways that the priests and the Hutts profit from these colonies? Yeah, Han said. So go on, what's the second way? Slaves, Nebel said bluntly. Trained, compliant slaves. The Ilesians export the pilgrims from the spice factories when they consider them fully trained, all will to resist removed. They are taken to other worlds and sold. Their places in the factories are taken by fresh shipments of pilgrims. And the slaves are too cowed and brainwashed to complain or tell the truth about Ilesia and what's waiting for the pilgrims here, Han asked. Certainly. And even if they did talk, who listens to a slave? And if the slave gets too noisy, Nebel made a sudden, unmistakable hand-across throat gesture. Silencing a slave is easy. Han was thinking about 921. She said she'd been on Ilesia nearly a year. How long do they keep them before they ship the slaves out? And where do they send them? A year is standard. They send many of the strong ones to Kessel, to work in the spice mines. Nobody ever gets off Kessel alive, you know. And the pretty ones, they are the lucky few. They go for dancing girls or boys, or to the barracks pleasure houses. An undignified life, perhaps, but far easier than slaving and dying in the mines. Nebel was watching Han intently out of his wet luminous eyes. Why do you ask? Is there a particular slave that matters to you? Well, kinda, Han admitted. She works in the glitter stim factory, down on the deepest level. She's been here close to a year. If you care for her, you should get her out of there, Vic, the Celestin said. The death rates for the glitter stim workers are very high. The spice cuts them, and then the fungi get into their bloodstreams, and... He made a tossing away gesture with his fingers. Get her out of there. Being shipped off-world as a slave is her only hope. Off-world? Han fought back a stab of fear at the thought that he might never see Pilgrim 921 again. What, I'm supposed to hope that she gets shipped out to some barracks pleasure house, to be a plaything for bored Imperial troops. Better that than a miserable death from slow blood poisoning. Han was thinking fast, and he didn't like what he was thinking. Listen, Nebel, I'm glad we got to talk. I'll come back and visit again sometime. Right now, there's something I've gotta do. The alien nodded kindly. I quite understand, Vic. Once outside, Han realized that the short Elysian day was definitely waning. The pilgrims would be at evening devotions. If he hurried, he might be able to catch up with 921 and have a few words with her. He had to figure out some way to get her out of that factory and yet keep her here on Elysia. Despite the wet heat and the fine drizzle that was falling, Han began to jog through the jungle, up the familiar path. His breath burned in his chest after the first 5 minutes or so, but he refused to slow down. He just had to see 921's face, reassure himself she was still here, on Elysia. What if she'd been shipped off-world? He'd never find her, never. Han felt panic nibble at the edge of his mind and cursed himself in every language he knew. What has gotten into you, Solo? You've got to get a hold of yourself. Things are going good for you here on Elysia. At the end of the year, you'll have a stack of credits waiting in an account on Coruscant. Now is no time to lose your head over some crazy religious fanatic. Get over it. But his body and heart would not listen to his mind. Han's strides came longer and faster until he was running full tilt. He rounded a turn near the plain of flowers, and nearly ran headlong into the first of the pilgrims on their way back from evening devotions. They were staggering or shambling along, that drugged ecstatic look in their glazed eyes. Han began elbowing his way through the throng, feeling like a fish swimming upstream. He squinted at faces in the gathering darkness, peered beneath caps, searching. Where was she? Increasingly worried, Han began grabbing Pilgrim's arms and demanding to know if anyone had seen Pilgrim 921. Most ignored him or stared stupidly, slack-jawed, but finally an old Corellian woman jerked her thumb behind her. Han turned to find 921 some distance behind the others. Relief flooded through him. He hurried up to her, still panting, sweaty, and disheveled from his run. "Hi," he wheezed, hoping the greeting didn't sound as lame to her as it did to him. She looked up at him in the twilight. "Hi," she said uncertainly. "You've been gone for a while." "Off-world," Han said, taking her arm and falling into step with her. "Had some cargo to transport." "Oh. So, how's it been going?" he asked. "Fine," she said. The exultation was wonderful tonight. "Yeah," he agreed grimly. "I'm sure it was." "How was your voyage, Vic?" she asked after a minute or so of silence. Han was pleased by her question. It was the first time she'd betrayed any curiosity about him and his life. "It turned out okay," he said, picking his way down the muddy path, trying not to get his boots any worse than they already were. He was splashed to the knees with all that running. "Pirates shot at me though." "Oh no." She looked distressed. "Pirates. You could have been hurt." He smiled at her and shifted his grip so they were walking hand in hand. "How nice to know you care," he said with a touch of his old cockiness. For a moment he thought she might pull away, but she let him hold her hand. By the time they'd reached the dorm, it was dark. Han walked her over to their same spot, halfway between the light and the darkness. He took off her infrared goggles. "What are you doing?" she asked nervously. "I want to see you," Han said. "You know those goggles hide your eyes." He took her hand and raised it to his lips, then kissed the back of it. "I missed you while I was away," he murmured. "You did?" He couldn't tell whether the thought pleased or distressed her. Maybe both. "Yeah. I thought about you," he continued softly. It occurred to him that this was the first time he'd ever been this honest about his feelings with a girl. For once in his life he wasn't putting on an act. "I didn't want to," he added honestly, "but I did." "You do care, don't you?" Just a little. She stammered. I don't know. She tried to pull her hand away, but Han wouldn't let it go. He began to kiss her fingers, her scarred, lacerated fingers. The touch of her skin against his mouth intoxicated him as much as the Alderanian ale. He rained soft tender little kisses over her knuckles, her fingertips. Stop that, she whispered. Please. Why? He asked, turning her hand over, so he could kiss her wrist. Han gloried in the jump of her pulse against his mouth. He pressed his lips against her palm, feeling the ridges of scars old and new. Don't you like it? Yes, no. I don't know, she burst out, sounding on the verge of tears. She yanked her hand back, and this time Han let it go, but stepped forward to catch her sleeve. Please, he said, holding her with his eyes as much as with his hand. Please, don't go. Can't you tell that I care about you? I worry about you, I think about you. I care about you. He swallowed, and it hurt. A lot. She caught her breath, and it sounded like a sob. I don't want you to care, she said, her voice ragged. Because, I'm not supposed to care. You won't even tell me your name, Han finished, and he couldn't hide the touch of bitterness in his voice. She stood poised for flight, like a bird, her eyes wide and tormented. I care about you too, she whispered, finally. Her voice trembled. But I shouldn't. I'm only supposed to care about the one, and the all. You want me to break my vows, Vic? How can I give up everything I believe in? Hearing her admit that she had feelings for him made Han's heart turn over. Tell me your name, he pleaded. Please. She stared at him, eyes bright with tears, then she whispered, It's Bria. Bria Theron. Then, without another word, she picked up the skirts of her robe and ran away, through the door, into the dorm. Han stood in the darkness and felt a slow, wide grin spread across his face. All his exhaustion fell away, and his feet felt as though he were wearing repulsor lift boots. He walked away from the dorm, still smiling, and barely noticed when the skies opened up and it began to pour. She does care, he thought, slogging through the ubiquitous mud. Bria, that's nice. Sounds like music or something. Bria. The next day, after long hours of thinking and planning during a mostly sleepless night, Han went in search of Teroenza. He found the high priest and Veritil relaxing in the mudflats that lay about a kilometer inland from the shallow Ilesian Ocean. Both priests lounged at their ease, immersed in warm red mud up to their massive flanks. Occasionally one or the other would roll over and thrash a bit, to cover an area that had dried out. The two Gamorreans on guard duty looked positively envious of their masters. Han, on the other hand, came close enough to the mud wallow to catch a whiff, and grimaced. Ugh! Smells like something died last week. The Corellian stood balancing precariously on the bank and waved to get Teroenza's attention. Sir? I'd like a word with you if possible. The high priest was in a good mood, relaxed from the mud. He waved an undersized arm. Our heroic pilot. Please join us. Climb into that muck. On purpose? Han thought, repressing a grimace. But he understood that the Tlandatil were offering him a great honor. He sighed. When Teroenza beckoned to him again, Han grinned and waved back genially. He unfastened his gun belt, letting his newly reclaimed blaster in its holster slip to the ground. After yanking off his boots, he unsealed his pilot's coverall and stepped out of it, leaving him clad only in his shorts. Carefully, he placed his belt pouch atop the pile, with the open end facing the mud hole. Then, with a grimace that he tried to turn into a smile, the Karelian stepped off the bank. Red mud oozed up his legs, and for a second Han nearly panicked, picturing himself sinking completely out of sight. But there was solid ground beneath the mud. Waving and smiling at the Tlandatil, Han grimly waded out until he was slithering in mud up to his thighs. "Isn't this wonderful?" Veritil asked, generously catching up a huge blob of mud and slathering Han's back. "Nothing in this galaxy beats a good mud bath." Han nodded vigorously. "Yeah. Great. I suggest you go for a roll," Teroenza boomed. "That always refreshes me after the stresses of everyday life." "Try it." "Sure," Han agreed, smiling through clenched teeth. "A good roll sounds like just the thing." Gingerly, he lowered himself into the mud, and with a great slosh and splat, he rolled completely over in the slimy oozing stuff. It didn't help his mood to notice that there were long white worms inhabiting the mud. Han assumed they weren't carnivorous, or the priests wouldn't be having such a wonderful time. "Bria honey, I hope you appreciate this," he thought as he completed his roll and sat back up, coated now from the neck down. "Wonderful," he said loudly. "So, squishy." "So Pilot Drago, why did you wish to speak with me?" Teroenza asked as the high priest languidly settled deeper into the wallow. "Well, I think I may have solved your problem, sir. The problem of how to take care of your collection, that is." Teroenza's massive head swiveled on his almost non-existent neck. "Really, how?" "I've made friends with one of the pilgrims, a young woman from my homeworld. Before she came here to be a pilgrim, she was studying to be a museum curator, and she knows a lot about caring for rare things. Antiquities, collectibles, stuff like that. I'll bet she could properly catalog and care for the stuff in your collection." Teroenza listened intently, though the high priest sat back on his haunches, mud squishing up around him. "I had no idea any of our pilgrims had such training. Perhaps I will interview this one. What is her designation?" "She's Pilgrim 921, sir." "And where does she work?" "In the glitter stim factory, sir." "How long has she been here on Ilesia?" "Almost a year, sir." Teroenza turned to Veritil, and the two priests began talking in their own language. "I gotta learn their lingo for myself," Han thought. He'd found a language program to teach elementary Huttese, and been studying that for the past month. But he'd been unable to locate any translation guides or programs for learning the Tlandatil language. He strained his ears, hoping to be able to decipher what the priests were saying, but Tlandatil was apparently sufficiently different from Huttese to make it impossible for him to understand anything. Turning back to Han, Veritil said, "This Pilgrim 921, would you say she's attractive, as your species measures attractiveness? For example, do you find her appealing as a potential sexual partner?" Deep in the mud, Han crossed his fingers. 921. "Oh no, sir, she's, well, to be frank, sir, she's so ugly that if I had a pet with a face that homely, I'd make it walk backward." When they heard Han's words, both priests guffawed and slapped their arms across their chests, which was apparently their species' way of paying tribute to a witty turn of phrase. "Very good, Pilot Drago," Teroenza boomed. "You are indeed a sharp fellow, and I shall investigate this young woman." He sloshed around a bit, letting the mud slop up around his huge flanks. "Ah," he sighed with pleasure. "So Veritil." Han squirmed around in the mud until he was facing the Sacerdot. "I've got something I'm curious about. Mind if I ask you a question?" "Not at all," the younger priest said. "How do you guys do that thing you do with the pilgrims each night at the devotion? What they call the exaltation. It sure packs a wallop whatever it is." "The exaltation," Veritil chuckled a low booming sound. That moment of rapture the pilgrims regard as a divine gift. Right, Han said. I've never been able to experience it, he admitted. Because I've fought it as hard as I can, he added silently. Because the last thing I want is some critter as ugly as you giving me jolts in my pleasure neurons. That is because you are a strong-minded individual pilot Drago, Veritil said. Our pilgrims come to us because they are not strong-minded, they are weak, and looking for guidance. And their diets are designed to make them even more malleable. Teroenza spoke up. The exaltation is a refinement of an ability we males of the Tlandatil use to attract the females of our species during mating season. We create a frequency resonance within the recipient's brain that stimulates the pleasure centers. The humming vibration is produced by air flowing over the cilia in our neck pouches when we inflate them. Our females find it irresistible. We males also have a low-grade emphatic projection ability, Veritil said. By concentrating on feeling good, we can project those feelings at the crowd of pilgrims. Both effects, taken together, produce the exaltation. Neat trick, Han said admiringly. Is it difficult? Not at all, Teroenza said. What we find difficult is having to lead the pilgrims in those endless services and prayers. At times, I've been so bored that I nearly fall asleep, waiting for my turn to lead the devotions. Last year, one of the sacerdotes did fall asleep, Veritil said, booming with his species version of laughter. Pelazidar fell right over. The pilgrims were most upset. Both priests enjoyed the memory. Han laughed too, but inside he was simmering with anger, thinking of the pilgrims staggering down the path, religious faith and devotion shining in their eyes. This place makes any of Garish Shrike's scams look like nothing, he thought disgustedly. Someone should shut these greedy vermin down. For a moment he wished he could be the one to do it. Then Han reminded himself that sticking one's neck out for others was a good way to get one's head and shoulders permanently separated. So why are you doing all this for Bria? His treacherous mind asked sarcastically. Because, his heart answered, Bria's safety has become as important to me as my own. I can't help it, it's just the way things are. Now that he'd accomplished what he'd come here to do, Han began to think about how to gracefully, metaphorically speaking, extract himself from the mud and the company of the priests. He was rescued by the arrival of a Hutt, who came gliding over the mudflat on his repulsor lift sled. A small squad of guards trotted vigorously alongside, panting in the humid heat as they struggled to keep up. Zavel, Teroenza hailed his Hutt overlord, standing respectfully. Feeling like a fool, Han did likewise. This was the Corellian's first close-up encounter with a Hutt, and he tried not to stare at the creature's huge recumbent form, the enormous pouchy eyes amid the leathery tan skin, and the green slime that oozed from the corners of the being's mouth. They're even uglier than Teroenza and his crew, Han thought. He reminded himself that Hutts had been civilized for probably longer than his own species, but he still couldn't quite eliminate the revulsion their appearance caused. Or maybe it was just the knowledge that it was the Hutts who dreamed up the idea of running a religion on Ilesia as a cheap way to enslave innocent sapiens that repulsed him. The Hutt leaned toward Teroenza and said in Huttese, "I've received a message from home. Jabba and Gilliac deny everything, and we have no proof. The clan council has refused to." Han couldn't catch the word, so we have no other way to, and he finished with a phrase that Han couldn't translate. "Regrettable," replied Teroenza in Huttese. "What about my requisition for more troops, armament and shielding for our ships, Your Excellency?" "Approved," Zavel said. "Should be arriving any day." "Good." Teroenza continued in basic, "Zavel, I would like you to meet our brave pilot, Vic Drago, who saved our shipment of glitterstim." The huge hut chuckled a "heh, heh, heh" sound that was so deep and resonant that Han could feel it as well as hear it. "Greetings, Pilot Drago. You have our lasting gratitude." "Thank you, sir." Teroenza waved an undersized arm. "The correct form of address is, Your Excellency, Pilot Drago." "Okay then. Thank you, Your Excellency. I'm honored to be able to serve you." The hut chuckled again, and said to Teroenza in Huttese, "A most polite and perceptive young man, for a human. Have you arranged for a bonus? We want to keep him happy." "Yes, I have, Your Excellency," Teroenza replied. Han, of course, did not let on that he'd understood any of the exchanges in Huttese. "Good, good," Zavel said. Han stood watching as the alien turned his repulsor lift sled and glided away. Teroenza and Veritil began slogging their way out in the mud with grunts of effort. The High Priest addressed Han in Basic. "His Excellency is pleased with your performance, pilot. Has the factory foreman informed you as to when the next shipment will be ready for transport?" Han, too, was squishing his way toward the bank. "He said at the end of the week, sir. In the meantime, there are 2 shipments of pilgrims due in at the space station, one tomorrow, one the day after." "Good. We don't want to be short-handed in the factories." Once back on the bank, Han scooped up his clothes, then turned east and gestured in the direction of the ocean a kilometer away. "I think I'll walk over and rinse off," he said, "before I get dressed." "Ah yes," said Veritil, "we use the mud as a cleansing agent, but it does not cling to our skins the way it appears to cling to yours. Once dry, all we need to do is shake." He gave a pronounced shudder and dust rose in clouds, "and it all flakes away as you can see." "Yes, I see that," Han said. "But I'll have to use water to rinse." "Be careful not to go too far into the ocean, Pilot Drago," Teroenza cautioned. "Some of the denizens of the Ylesian oceans are quite large, and very hungry." "Yes, sir," Han said. Holding his clothes and boots away from his red mud-covered body, Han began picking his way barefoot toward the ocean. He couldn't see it yet, because of a ridge of sand dunes, but he could smell the warm brackish water. When he reached it a short time later, he cautiously ventured out knee-deep, and then squatted down to let the pounding surf sluice over him. Again and again the waves washed over the Corellian, rinsing away all trace of the red muck. Then Han went over to the sandy shore, found a smooth patch, and stretched out to dry. He felt the dim Ylesian sun beating down on him, drying him, leaving his hair salt-stiffened and tousled. "But anything's better than that mud," he thought drowsily. He was almost asleep when Han jerked awake, remembering something he'd forgotten. He got up to his feet, walked over to his clothes, then fumbled with his belt pouch. Looking carefully around before he did so, he withdrew the tiny audiolog recording device he'd borrowed from the Ylesian dream and, seeing that it was still running, turned it off with a decisive snap. Satisfied that he'd successfully recorded the entire exchange between himself and the Ylesian priests, Han walked back to his spot, lay down on the warm sand and took a well-deserved nap. Chapter 8 Revelations. Han flew many missions for the Ylesians during the next 3 months. Several times he was able, with Muurgh's complicity, to make small, side runs, to hone his piloting skills and to allow Muurgh to practice with the weaponry. Han successfully landed vessels on airless moons, on ice moons, even on a small asteroid barely bigger than his ship. He learned to dock with a space station, matching airlocks perfectly on the first try. As a result of Han's run-in with the pirates, the Ylesian huts increased the weaponry and equipped their ships with better shielding. They also tightened the security surrounding the dates and locations of their shipments, and refused to agree to any more off-planet rendezvous points. Instead, Han was ordered to fly his cargo to a planet and exchange the processed spice for the raw materials planetside. In a populated area, there was less chance of a double-cross that might lead to an ambush. Teroenza made it clear to Muurg that Vic Drago had passed muster as a trustworthy employee, so Muurg no longer felt compelled to spend every waking moment with the Corellian. The big Tagorian was still bound by his promise to guard the pilot, however, and Muurg never forgot that. True to his promise, Teroenza interviewed Bria and gave the Corellian woman the job of maintaining and cataloging his collection. Han was able to see her every day he was on Ilesia. Once she began getting better food in the mess hall, and healthy exposure to fresh air and sunlight, that pale, wan, too thin look vanished, and her eyes grew bright, her step lighter, and her smile came more readily. She liked her new job, both because she enjoyed caring for the antiquities and because she felt that serving the high priest was a sacred honor. Bria continued to attend prayer times every morning and devotions every evening. When Han was on Ilesia, he usually walked her to and from the service. Bria was offered a room in the administration center, but told Teroenza that she preferred to stay in the pilgrims' dormitory. Not only did she enjoy the company of her fellow pilgrims at prayer time, but she found she was uneasy at the thought of occupying an apartment in the same building as Vic Drago. Bria Theron was still wary of the Corellian, still unwilling to respond to the feelings he awakened in her. She was a pilgrim, she reminded herself constantly. Her loyalty, her duty, her spiritual self was reserved for the one and the all. Still, there was no doubt that she enjoyed Vic's company. He was so alive, so full of energy, so charming and attractive. Bria had never met anyone like him. During the hour before evening devotions, when her daily work with the High Priest's collection was done, Bria developed the habit of searching out Vic and Muurg. They were almost always together, and then the three of them would go to the mess hall for a cup of stim tea together. Bria walked through the jungle, enjoying the small respite from the heat that the lowering sun brought. A breeze was blowing in off the ocean, which was where she was headed. She walked quickly, feeling the skirts of her tan pilgrim's robe brushing the plants that grew along the edges of the path. Brilliant flowers hung from drooping vines, scarlet, purple and green-yellow. Their sharp, slightly astringent scent made her nostrils flare as she passed them. The Exalted One, Teroenza, had told Bria that she was free to put on regular clothing, in place of her bulky pilgrim garb, pointing out that it would make it easier to tend his collection, but so far the girl clung to her robes, as she clung to her vows. The young Corellian woman reached the mudflats and paused to make an obeisance before the mud wallow where two priests lounged. Both ignored her, but Bria was used to that. Priests paid little attention to pilgrims, unless they needed to direct them in their work. That was natural, their minds were on higher things, soaring on spiritual planes that humanoids like Bria could not hope to reach. The first time Bria had seen the priests wallowing in the red stinking mud, she'd been shocked. It was unsettling to see them indulging in such a secular activity. But over the past 3 months, ever since she'd come to work for his exaltedness, Teroenza, Bria had gotten used to seeing them. She was glad that she no longer had to work in the darkness of the glitter stim factory. Working in the administration building was much nicer. Climate-controlled, with good lighting, and the food was much better. It had taken Bria nearly a full month to be able to eat a regular meal. At first she'd been so listless, so drained of energy, she just picked at her food, as she'd been doing for months. The medical droid had had to treat her for malnutrition, as well as traces of fungi-induced blood sickness. But now she was fine. Things were much better for her, she had to admit, since Vic had come into her life. If only. Bria frowned, and sighed. If only Vic were a pilgrim too. Then they could worship together, attend prayer times together, and receive the sacrament of exaltation together. But Vic, she couldn't escape the fact that he was an unbeliever, even though he'd never admitted to it. Vic believed in nothing but himself. When they attended devotions together, he would hold her arm or her hand to steady her on the way back to her dorm. The touch of his hand made her question her devotion to the One, the All, and Bria didn't like that. She wanted nothing to shake her faith or make her question her vows. By now she'd reached the sand dunes. As she'd half expected, she heard the sound of a blaster bolt whine and sizzle. "Vic," she called, not wanting to sneak up on a man who was doing target practice. "Vic, it's me." As she climbed to the top of the dune, the wind grabbed her robes and whipped them about her legs. She had to hold on to her cap, lest it be blown off by the ocean wind. Below her, on the beach, she could see Vic, legs braced in a shooter's stance, his blaster in its holster, which he wore slung low far down his thigh. Murg was some distance from the Karelian, holding several black ceramic target pieces. Without warning, the big Tagorian flung two of the targets into the air, one high and to his left, the other low and to his right. Vic's hand was a blur of motion so fast that Bria's eyes could barely follow it. A blaster bolt shattered first the rightmost, then the left target piece. Tiny droplets of slagged ceramic rained into the restless Ilesian surf. Murg yowled his approval. Vic turned, ready to practice distance shooting at the stationary target they'd set up, then he spotted Bria at the top of the dune. With a wave and grin, he holstered his blaster and loped toward her. Bria was struck, as she always was, by how good-looking he was, with his regular features, brown hair and eyes and lean build. Taken all together, he wasn't actually a classically handsome man, but any woman who'd ever been on the receiving end of his smile wouldn't notice that. "Hi," he yelled, running up to her. Before Bria could fend him off, he dropped a kiss on her forehead. Breathless, she pushed him away. "No, Vic. That's against my vows." "I know," he said unrepentantly, "but someday, honey, you're gonna kiss me back." "I wondered if you wanted to go for stim tea before devotions," she said. "Not today," he said, suddenly serious, looking down into her face. "There's something we need to talk about, Bria. I've waited until you were better, because I'm afraid it's gonna be a shock. But you gotta find out sometime." Bria looked up at him, wondering what was going on. "What are you talking about, Vic?" "Let's go and sit down," he said. "Over here, on the beach, okay?" He led her over to a smooth spot in the sand, and when Murg came up to see if they were going back, Vic shook his head. "Give us a little privacy for a while, pal, okay?" The Tagorian walked away, up the dune. Bria watched as his inky form vanished behind the hill of sand. Her heart began to race as Vic took a small device out of his pocket. "This is the audio log recorder I pulled out of the Dream's control panel," he told her. "I'm going to play a recording I made a couple of months ago, before Teroenza asked you to look after his collection. Just be patient and listen, okay?" "I don't know. I can tell I'm not going to like this," she muttered. "I've got a bad feeling about that recording." "Please," he said. "For me. Just listen." Bria nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. Suddenly the ocean breeze, instead of seeming pleasant, made her shiver despite the sun dipping toward the west. Vic turned on the recorder. Bria listened to the conference that ensued. Heard Vic greet the priests and heard them invite him to take a mud bath. Bria recognized exalted Teroenza's and Sacradat Verital's voices talking to the pilot. Mud baths. They were saying how relaxing mud baths were. Bria stirred restlessly, and Vic held up a warning finger and mouthed, "Wait." She forced herself to sit still, though she was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Surely the priests had not known that Vic was recording their conversation. His actions were worse than eavesdropping, more like outright spying. Then, Bria caught her breath in dismay. She heard Veritil and Teroenza laughing and talking about the exaltation. They were saying it was not a divine gift, they were saying it had nothing at all to do with the one or the all. Bria's eyes widened, then narrowed in fury, and she shot to her feet. The wind whipped her pilgrim's cap off, allowing her golden-red curls to spring free, but she paid no attention. She was trembling with anger as she faced Vic. Seeing her reaction, he shut off the recorder and stood to face her. "How could you?" Bria demanded, her voice low and shaking. "I thought you were my friend." He stepped toward her, hands raised placatingly. "Bria, sweetheart, I am your friend. I did it for you, you need to know the truth. I'm sorry you're—" Bria's hand and arm seemed to move of their own volition, coming up in a roundhouse slap that connected solidly with his cheek. Vic staggered back, hand pressed to his face. "You're lying," she cried. "Lying. You faked that to make me break my vows. Admit it." He dropped his hand and stood staring at her, and his eyes were full of sadness and pity. Slowly, Vic shook his head. "I'm sorry, babe," he said. "Sorrier than I can say. But I didn't fake it. What you heard is the truth, and getting mad at me won't change that. Teroenza and his crew don't have any divine gifts. They invented this whole scam just to get factory workers and slaves to sell." The print of her hand was darkening on his cheek, dull red where she'd struck him. Bria could see the marks of her fingers. She fought the impulse to throw herself at him, babbling apologies. How could she have hurt him like that? At the same time though, she was angry clear through. Bria could feel her face working. Her chin trembled as she tried to control herself. "No." She clenched her hands. "No. That's not true. You faked it. What are you, telepathic? How did you know about Sakradat Palazadar? You weren't even here then." He shook his head. "I didn't know, Bria. I didn't know, and I didn't fake this recording. I'm gonna prove that to you." Digging into his pocket, he held out a small black vial. Bria knew only too well what it was. "Glitter stim. Where did you get it?" "Light fingered it during a delivery," Vic said. "You know what it can do, right?" Slowly Bria nodded. "This is the only way I can prove to you I'm not lying. If you open it, expose it to light, then swallow it, it'll give you temporary telepathic abilities. You'll be able to read my mind, and you'll know that I'm not lying about the exaltation, and that I didn't fake that recording. Here," he reached out and dropped it into her hand. "Take it." Bria looked down at the tube. I need to think about this, Vic. I need to decide what to do. I'm not lying, honey, I swear." He came closer to her, reached out to take her hands. "Trust me." She backed away from him. "Just, leave me alone for now, Vic. I'll see you later. After the devotion. Right now I have to go." He looked at her. "You could skip it this once. It's not like anyone takes roll call." Skip the exaltation. Bria felt physically sick at the thought, and her reaction terrified her. What if Vic was right? What if the exaltation was nothing more than a combination physical and mental vibration from an alien species? If no divine gift was present, then the pilgrims were no better than addicts getting a fix. Bria gazed into Vic's eyes and had a queasy feeling that he was telling the truth. Her fingers tightened over the small black cylinder of glitter stim. Here lay her answer. With this, she could find out the truth. She turned and began walking away, leaving him there on the beach. Bria heard Vic call out to her, but she waved him away and kept moving. She didn't have much time if she was going to make it to the devotion on schedule. Half an hour later she stood amid the hordes of pilgrims, watching the sun set in bloody splendor behind the altar of promises. It was almost time for the exaltation. She glanced around her, thinking that if she was going to do this, it had better be soon. Surreptitiously her fingers withdrew the black cylinder from the pocket of her robe. Light, she needed light to activate the glitter stim. And yet, she couldn't do it while anyone would see. Finally, the moment came that she was waiting for, the signal to the faithful that the exaltation was about to begin. Bria had stationed herself in the crowd so that she had a clear view of the high priest and the sacerdotes as they led the pilgrims in the devotion. But she was far back in the crowd, far enough back that she ought to be able to shield the glitter stim with her wide sleeve, so its activation wouldn't be noticed by the Tlandatil. And the other pilgrims would be so busy with the exaltation that they'd probably barely notice a blaster bolt. All around her, pilgrims were falling to their knees. Bria let herself follow them, and as she did so, she flipped open the top of the vial of glitter stim. Under the cover of her body as she bent forward from the waist, she pulled free the fibrous dose of the drug and wondered, for an insane second, whether this was a dose she herself had prepared. As the pilgrims prostrated themselves, the priest's throat pouches began to distend. As the beginnings of the vibrating hum resounded through the air, Bria held the glitter stim before her, full in the last rays of the setting sun. Within seconds it activated, sparkling blue, but none of the pilgrims noticed, and the effect was hidden from the high priest. Even though she'd never taken glitter stim before, Bria knew exactly how many seconds to wait. A moment later she shoved it into her mouth and allowed her saliva to quench the sparking substance. As she mouthed the drug, then swallowed it, the exaltation began. Bria shuddered as though she'd been blaster shot. The effects of the glitter stim were immediate. Blood rushed through her body like a ship going into hyperspace. Her head pounded. But the physical effects were as nothing to the mental ones. Her mind opened in a way she'd never afterward be able to describe. As the waves of the exaltation took her, she experienced the pleasure of all the other pilgrims in the crowd. The sensation was so overwhelming that she almost passed out. Only the anger that had been simmering inside her ever since Vic had played that recording kept her sane and focused. Got to open my eyes, she thought. Focus. Gagging, gasping, Bria opened her eyes, shuddering as the waves of pleasure racked her with such intensity they were nearly transformed into pain. She stared at Teroenza, forcing herself not to look away, to narrow her mind to only encompass his. Images, alien images, flooded Bria's mind, stamping themselves indelibly into her consciousness. No matter how much she wished to forget, she knew she never ever would. Teroenza's mind, like that of every sentient, was full of surface trivia, wondering what he'd have for dinner, boredom with the ceremony, thoughts of the new security measures the Hutts had ordered him to implement, a minor gastrointestinal churn in his middle. There was not a hint of divinity in the high priest's mind. He did not believe in the one or the all. As a matter of fact, Teroenza was proud of himself for inventing the one and the all, so these credulous pilgrims could have something to believe in. Bria gagged, her mouth filled with the bitter aftertaste of the glitter stim. It was hard to think with the exaltation going on, but she forced herself to stay attuned to the high priest's mind, sifting, making absolutely certain that what he was doing was purely a physical and mental trick, something that all males of his species could do on demand. Suddenly Teroenza jerked, looking around him wildly. His mind filled with suspicion, then certainty. He knew he was being telepathically probed. The exultation wavered, then lessened abruptly as the high priest stopped humming. The sacerdotes continued in a ragged chorus, but without their leader the exultation stopped dead. Pilgrims cried out with shock, and some even fainted. Bria pulled her mind free from Teroenza's and joined the crowd of pilgrims who were moaning in distress, crying and stumbling back and forth disoriented. Some stood shivering and whining as they gazed beseechingly at the priests. Teroenza lumbered off the dais by the altar and began thrusting his way into the crowd. The Tlandatil peered down into faces, distractedly muttering blessings, as he tried to cover up the fact that he was desperately searching for the pilgrim who had just scanned his mind. Luckily, Bria was far back in the crowd, quite near the end of the amphitheater. She let herself be shoved backward, off the permacrete, until her feet encountered gooey jungle loam. With a single quick, decisive movement, Bria dug her toe into a lump of trampled leaves and mud and lifted it. Her fingers released the glitter stim cylinder, and it fell, landing in the center of the hole. Bria turned, and as she did so, her foot pressed the lump of mud back down into the jungle floor. The entire sequence of events had taken only a second. She began edging her way along the back of the crowd, toward the path, allowing herself to be carried along with the tide of incoherent, querulous, confused and dissatisfied pilgrims. A cautious glance behind her assured her that Teroenza had abandoned his search, apparently having realized how hopeless it was, and how much his atypical behavior was upsetting the pilgrims. Bria hoped that he'd put the entire experience down to some relative newcomer deciding to experiment with a stolen vial of glitter stim. She moved numbly down the path, her footsteps slow and unsteady. The effects of the glitter stim had faded so much that she was barely aware of the thoughts and emotions of those immediately around her. She wasn't surprised when Vic fell into step beside her. As usual, he took her arm to help support her. Bria leaned against him, grateful for his support, and felt his arm go around her waist, until he was half holding her up. The swift equatorial dark was all around them now. Bria could barely see Vic. He led her down the path, avoiding the worst of the mud puddles. Then, when they reached the dorm, she stopped. "I'm not going in there just yet," she mumbled. I need to talk to you, Vic." He nodded, his features barely visible in the light cast from the open doors. "Okay. I don't think anyone will mind if we go up to the mess hall for a cup of stim tea. You look like you could use it." Together, they turned away into the darkness. Bria leaned on Vic as they went up the path. She had never felt so weary. A droid would have moved with more animation. When they reached the mess hall, Vic sat her down and fetched them cups of stim tea, plus a sugared pastry which he pushed at Bria. "Here," he said. "Eat this. You look like you need it." Obediently she sipped her tea and nibbled on the pastry. She hadn't had dinner, and the food seemed to steady her, bring the world back into focus. She leaned toward Vic, ready to talk, but even as she opened her mouth, he shook his head warningly. "Guess I'd better get you back to your dorm," he said loudly. "That'll teach you to skip meals 921. I thought you were going to pass out on me back there." Taking the hint, Bria got to her feet in silence and followed him out. When they reached the outside of the administration building, Vic pulled out a pair of infrared goggles and pulled them on. "You got yours?" Nodding, Bria located them and pulled them into place. The night suddenly resolved itself into ghostly black and greenish-white images. She could see Vic's face now, half hidden as it was, by the goggles. His arm came around her again as they started down the jungle path together. You took the glitter stim, he said quietly. Yes, she said, feeling as numb as if she'd been beaten into unconsciousness. You were right. Forgive me for doubting you. Hey, he said, trying to sound cheerful and failing utterly, I'd have wanted to check out my story too in your place. Was it rough? She nodded, and suddenly feeling rushed back, in a black tide, leaving her shaking and gasping. Oh Vic, she babbled. I was in his mind, Teroenza's mind, and it was terrible. No divine gift, just a bored selfish sentient who wants to get richer so he can add to his collection. Take it easy, he said, holding her shoulders to steady her. You've had an awful shock. I feel so, betrayed, Bria got out, between chattering teeth. It was terrible. Hey there, sweetheart. His arms went around her, and the expression of sympathy was her undoing. Bria began to sob, huge gulping, racking sobs that hurt. Vic helped her take her goggles off, then he just held her, stroking her hair, patting her back, murmuring soothing reassurances and endearments. She held on to the front of his coverall with both hands, twisting and wringing the fabric, and weeping so hard she scared herself. Bria had never cried like this before. The sense of desolation was terrible. I don't have anything left, she choked out between spasms of crying. Nothing. Of course you do, Vic murmured, kissing her cheek gently. You've got us, right? Us, she whispered. Sure. We're gonna be together, sweetheart. We're gonna get off this hellish planet, and we're gonna be happy. She raised her head, staring blindly into the darkness. Her night sight could barely make out the lighter blur of his face. But they never let pilgrims go, Bria mumbled. I read that in Teroenza's mind. We won't ask him, honey. We'll just up and go. Escape, she whispered. You got it, he said. As soon as I can figure out a way to do it, we're gonna get out of here. I've already begun thinking about it. He gave her a quick kiss on her cheek. Trust me. I've had experience at this kind of thing. I'll figure it out. But your money, she said. You're under contract, and you can't break it. If you run away, you'll lose your money. You told me you needed those credits they're paying you to try and get into the academy. How can you give that up? He shrugged. One credit is as good as another. I'll just have to get it out of Teroenza another way. Bria's mind was fogged with exhaustion and the grief of betrayal. It took her a full minute to realize what Vic was talking about. The collection, she whispered. You're planning to steal Teroenza's collection and escape. Pretty good, he said approvingly. You sure you're not still having some of those glitter stim insights? I don't think so, Bria said wearily. I just know that you've asked me about it a lot of times, asked me what items are the most valuable. You really think you can break the security locks and steal the collection? Not the whole thing, he said. It'd take a bigger cargo ship than any on Ilesia to haul it all away. I'm just gonna take the small stuff, the really valuable small stuff. He looked at her intently. And you're gonna help me, right? She hesitated. Stealing antiquities was contrary to everything she'd ever believed in. But Teroenza's antiquities weren't in a museum, where the public could see them. They were being hoarded by a greedy private collector. If Vic stole them, they'd be put back into circulation, and there was a good chance that at least some of them would wind up on public display in some store or gallery. Okay, Bria said. She drew a long shaky breath. I'll help you, Vic. Good. You and me, We're gonna swipe a ship and we're getting ourselves off this planet. I'm sick of the heat, sick of the humidity, and sick to death of these priests and their hokey religion. Bria took a breath. Leave here. Never attend devotion and receive the exaltation again. How can I live without it? Resolutely, she put the question out of her mind. She'd manage somehow. Maybe she could wean herself away from it over the next week or so, until they left. There's just one more thing, Vic, she said uncertainly. What, sweetheart? Muirg. What about Muirg? You told me that he'd given his word to guard you, that he's as much your guard as your protector. What will you do about him? Vic drew a long breath, and she saw the blur of his face move as he shook his head. That's the Vrelt in the kitchen, he said, using an old Karelian phrase for bad luck or disaster. I don't know what I'm going to do about him. I really like the big guy, but he's told me about this word of honor code of his people. I'm afraid he'll be loyal to Teroenza no matter what. You mean if he finds out what we're planning, he'll turn us in? Good chance of it. Oh, Vic. There was a catch in her voice. What are we going to do? What if we can't get away? Don't worry, honey. Leave that to me. Vic sighed. If I have to, I'll deal with Muirg. I'm a better shot than he is, and much faster on the draw. You'd shoot him? If it's a choice between you and me, or Muirg, yeah, I will. I just wish I could convince him to throw in with us. If he did, I'd take him wherever he wanted to go. And give him enough credits to continue his search. Search? Yeah. He's looking for his mate, and he came here thinking she came to Ilesia. But he guessed wrong. Tagorians are rare, so rare that I'd never even heard of them till I got here. If a female Tagorian was here, she'd stick out like a sore thumb. Bria drew in her breath, startled. But... Vic. There was another Tagorian here. I remember seeing 106, maybe 8 months back. I just caught the one glimpse, but I'm sure of the species. Really? Was it a male or female? What did it look like? I have no idea what sex, she said. I don't think this Tagorian was as big as Muirg. It was white, with orange stripes. I think. I saw it one evening, just after devotions, and it was getting dark. I'll have to tell Muirg, Vic said. Those priests lie for a living. It's entirely possible, Mrav, I think that's her name, has been here on Ilesia the whole time. Maybe at Colony 2 or 3. He fell silent. Bria stood there, mulling over what he'd just said, and finally she couldn't stand it any longer. Please, Vic, she pleaded, tell me you didn't mean that about shooting Muirg if he tries to prevent us from stealing Teroenza's collection. There's got to be a way to avoid that. Bria liked Muirg. Over the past couple of months she'd gotten to know him a little, and she admired the big felinoid. I'll take care of him, whatever it takes. If I have to, I'll shoot him. Vic's voice was grim. But maybe I can just stun him, or give him a knock on that thick skull of his, leave him tied up, so the priests won't blame him when we make our getaway. Oh, Vic. Bria's eyes filled with tears again. Please try to figure out something, so Muirg doesn't get hurt. You're good at that. I will, sweetheart, he said, I will. He leaned forward to drop a quick kiss on her forehead, and this time she did not remind him of her vows. I have no vows, Bria thought dully as they began walking back toward her dorm. No vows, no religion, nothing at all. She glanced sideways in the darkness. Nothing except Vic. Muir glided soundlessly out of the jungle and stepped onto the path. The Tagorian's night vision was far better than a human's. He could easily make out the distant pair walking down the path. They were almost to the dawn. The felinoid had been creeping through the jungle with exaggerated care for the past couple of minutes, determined to get close enough to overhear their whispered conversation. The Tagorian had only managed to get close enough to catch the tail end of what they'd been discussing, but he'd heard enough. Pilot and Bria were planning to escape. They were planning to steal from their masters. Pilot was planning to take care of Muir. The Tagorian shook his massive head unhappily. Muir had given his word of honor to his masters, his course should be clear. But it wasn't. He knew well enough what he should do. He should go to Teroenza tomorrow morning and tell him what he'd overheard. Or perhaps he, Muir, should kill Pilot himself and tell the priest why after the deed was done. But he stood there hesitating. It was obvious that Pilot was desperate enough to shoot him to get away. Muir had given his word of honor to guard Pilot. But Pilot was also Vic, and Muir had come to think of Vic as a friend. Vic was determined to protect his female. Muir could understand that. He'd do almost anything to protect Mrav, if he could only find her. Muir growled low in his throat. Perhaps he should pretend to be friendly, so that Pilot would allow him to get close enough to use his teeth and claws. Muir was an expert hunter. Once he'd gotten hold of his prey there was no escape. Could he kill Vic to keep his word of honor? Muir growled again and turned back into the jungle. Tonight he would hunt, and he would kill. He would tear open and consume his fresh prey. Perhaps that would clear his mind, and then he would be able to decide what to do. Muir glided beneath the giant trees, as silent and invisible as a wraith. Chapter 9. Lost and Found. The next morning Han whistled cheerfully as he showered, and even rubbing the nasty-smelling antifungal grey goo over himself couldn't depress him. He and Bria were getting off this world, and they'd have plenty of credits once they sold the stolen items from Teroenza's collection. Han would be able to pay for his new ID, food and lodging while he took the exams to get into the academy. And when he got out, he'd be an officer, a respected man, and Bria would be waiting for him. Rubbing his wet hair with a towel, he headed for his clothes, which were lying across the foot of his bunk. He had no warning, none at all. One moment he was walking, the next something had grabbed him and flung him to the floor so hard it knocked the wind out of him. Han gasped like a beached Walloden, and spots danced before his eyes. But there was something else, there, too, holding him down, something that had one gigantic hand pressing his chest. Instinctively, Han lay still, gasping and finding breath, realizing that hand could crush him like a dilganut. Blackness swam before his eyes. No, the blackness was real. Real and furry, with a white spot in the middle of its chest and bristling white whiskers. Han managed to focus his eyes. Muir, he gasped feebly. What's going on? Muir snarled into Han's face, his huge fangs so close that Han could see them gleam with saliva. Pilot planning to escape, take Bria, he growled. Vic planning to steal from Ilethian math turf. Vic planning to take care of Muir. But the hand pressed down slightly, and Han subsided, eyes bulging. Muir raised a massive paw hand and flexed it slightly. Scimitar-like claws extruded. Now treacherous Pilot will die, the Tagorian snarled. No, Han put up his hands in a gesture of appeal. Please. Just listen. Muir then laughed night. Muir heard plenty, the Tagorian said grimly. Hey pal. Han babbled, imagining what those claws would do to his exposed throat. I thought we were friends. Muurg liked Pilot. Muurg ithori to have to kill Pilot. But word of honor wath given. No choice for Muurg. The hand started down. Han squeezed his eyes shut and waited for the end. He felt the breeze of the Togorian swing graze his cheek, his throat, but nothing touched him. After several eternities, Han opened his eyes again. Muurg was staring down at him, plainly torn. Finally, he grabbed Han by the shoulder and hair, jerked him to his feet, and pushed him in the direction of the Corellian's clothes. Get dressed. Muurg not want Pilot blood on his claws. We go to tell Teroenza what Pilot and girl are planning. Priest will tell other guards to kill traitors. Han hastened over to the bunk, and began dragging on his clothes. At least he wouldn't die naked and wet. Listen, Muurg, he said, you've gotta listen to me. Please. What can it hurt? Pilot live. Muurg now he live. Muurg, I will not listen. That's a good sign that he's regaining his cool, Han thought. The grammar I taught him is coming back. Sealing the front of his coverall, Han sat down on the edge of the bunk to pull on his boots. Your people have a code of honor, right? He said, thinking as fast as he'd ever thought in his life. Yes. If you give your word of honor to someone who's employing you, you've got to keep it, right? Yes. Pilot can move faster than that. Put on thoth booth. Han slowly inserted his right foot, toes pointed down, and began to pull the boot on. Well pal, suppose you gave your word of honor to someone and found that everything he told you was a lie on his part of the contract. What does that do to your agreement? Do you have to keep your word to someone who's lied to you and made a fool of you? Muurg eyed Han suspiciously, but said nothing. Come on pal, what's your code of honor say about making agreements with liars eh? Muurg shook his massive head, then his ears flattened in anger. If a Togorian makes a word of honor with a liar, contracteth void. There is no honor to be had dealing with a liar. All right, Han said with a surge of satisfaction. He picked up his left boot. Listen to me pal. I think Mrav is here, on Ilesia. I think Teroenza lied to you. Muurg stared at Han, then his blue eyes narrowed. You would lie to stay alive Vic. Yeah, I would pal, Han said honestly. But I swear to you I ain't lying about this. Swear. What if this, swear? It's, like a word of honor, sort of, said Han. My people swear by the most important thing in the world to them. It's like, sacred, I guess you'd say. Though what doth Vic swear by? Han thought for a moment. I swear, he said, slowly and distinctly, by Bria's life. You know I care for her, a lot. Don't you? Muurg considered for a moment, then nodded. Okay then, I swear to you, on Bria's life, that last night she told me she saw a Togorian here, 6 months or more ago. That would tie in with the time you were searching for Mrav, wouldn't it? Silently the Togorian nodded again. She saw a Togorian Muurg. Ask her yourself. Teroenza and his goons lied to you when they said she never came here. She's probably still here on Ilesia. Probably not here at Colony 1, 'cause that's too risky. But there's a good chance she's at Colony 2, or maybe even 3. But Colony 2 has been there longer, they've got a lot more pilgrims there than at Colony 3. So I'm betting she's at Colony 2. It's worth checking out, isn't it? What did he look like? Muurg asked slowly. For a moment Han was tempted to lie, say he didn't know, because what if he was wrong about the Togorian being Mrav, and Muir got mad and killed him right here and now? He took a deep breath. Bria said she was white and some other color. Striped. She thought they might be orange stripes, but she said it was almost dark, so she's not sure. I sure hope Mrav wasn't solid-colored or spotted. Muir's ears flattened, and he hissed like a leaky valve, teeth bared ferociously. Han desperately looked around for something to brain the Togorian with, but there wasn't a thing in reach. Silently he resigned himself to being ripped in two. Then Muir's furious hiss mutated into a pain-filled yowl of anguish. The big alien sank to the floor, clutching his head and yowling in an ululating keen. You have deprived her, he growled finally. By all the God of my fatherth, can thee have been here all thief daith, while I believe thoth liarth? I will go now to tear their throat out and eat their hearth. Phew, Han muttered softly. I'm glad that worked. Muir leaped to his feet, obviously ready to make good on his threat. Wait. Han leaped up and grabbed one huge arm, hung on as he was dragged across the floor, through the living room, almost to the door. He dug his heels in and refused to let go. Muir, if you want her back, stop. Muir slowed, then stopped. Good, Han said, panting. Now let's talk about this like rational sentience, okay? Sit down. Muir sank down onto his pallet. Han switched on some music, then pulled his beat-up chair so close to the Togorian that they were nearly touching. Talk low, he whispered, and Muir nodded. I've got a plan, Han said. I think I know how to get her, if she's still here on Ilesia. I just hope they haven't shipped her off to the spice mines, he thought, but he didn't say it aloud. Muir knew what happened to the slaves as well as he did by now. Okay Vic, Muir said, equally softly, tell me the plan. Han thought a moment. I'm going to need your help for some of this. I've got some preparations to make, and I'll try to get everything possible set up before I leave. Leave? Vic if leaving? Yes, but I'm not talking about our final escape. In a couple of days I've got to deliver a message and a gift from Zavel to a hut named Giliak on Nal Hata. I'm supposed to stay there and wait for a reply. I've never been to Nal Hata, and I don't know the drill there, but Jalis Nebel has. Muir nodded to show he was listening, and nervously began to groom his white whiskers. So okay. The dream is really too small for three. I'm gonna point that out to Teroenza and tell him Nebel wants to get back into flying again as my co-pilot. I'm pretty sure he'll agree to let me and Nebel fly this mission together. I'm gonna suggest that you stay here, 'cause there won't be room for you. Han got up and began pacing back and forth as he thought. The priests know you like to hunt, right? So when I get permission to take Nebel with me, you should request to spend a couple of days hunting. You can move fast over rough ground, right? Very fast, agreed the Togorian. Fast enough to track and kill prey. Do you think you could make it on foot to Colony 2? Yeth. Muir sounded positive. Well, it's our best shot. If Mrav is still here on Ilesia, there's a better than 50-50 chance that she's at Colony 2. You should go there and scout it out, find out if she's there. And rescue her, Muir leapt to his feet. No, Han snapped. Sit down. That would be the worst thing to do. They'd start a planet-wide search for the two of you. They'd use sensors tuned to Togorian readings to pinpoint you. Then you'd be captured and probably killed. Or sent to the mines of Kessel, which amounts to the same thing. You want Muir to be Mrav, and not let her be him. Exactly. Just find her, scout out where she sleeps, eats, stuff like that. Then, when we make our getaway, you and me will hop over to Colony 2 and break her out of there. I've been doing some late-night scouting around this place, in case you haven't noticed. Muirg noteth, the Tagorian said dryly. Everywhere Vic went, Muirg wath behind him, watching. Why do you think I knew to listen when you walked Bria back to her dorm? Well, anyway, I've figured out how to create a diversion that'll keep the guards busy while we get the best stuff out of the collection. And I know where the communications center is. I'll make sure that communications between the colonies are down by the time we get out of here. We'll hop over to Colony 2, and before they know what's happening, we'll grab Mrav and be hightailing it off this planet. Then I'll take you both back to Tagoria, okay? Muirg looked at Han, his blue eyes narrowing, whiskers twitching with emotion. You would do this for Muirg and Mrav? Yes. I swear it. If you help me and Bria break into and steal Teroenza's stuff, I swear to you we won't leave without Mrav. The big Tagorian thought about that for a long time, then his eyes met Han's. I will do it, he said. Word of honor. Han nodded. It's a deal, pal. That same evening, Han went over to Teroenza's treasure room to find Bria. He was wondering if she'd be attending devotions now that she knew they were faked. Standing outside, he knocked on the heavy metal-sheathed door. It's me, he called in response to her voice from inside. The door opened, and Bria stepped out. Han's eyes widened. Hey, you look great. For the first time since he'd known her, she'd doffed her bulky tan robes and concealing cap. Instead, she was wearing a simple pale blue tunic and trousers. Although modest in style, they revealed a figure that was slender but definitely female. Exalted Teroenza told me I could dispense with my pilgrim robes while I was working on the collection, she told him. When she saw the warmth in his eyes, she blushed a little, but smiled. He was afraid that I'd catch my robes on some valuable artifact and knock it off a shelf. Well, I approve, Han said. Want to get a cup of tea? Sure. When they were seated in the mess hall, with cups of stim tea before them, Bria smiled shyly at Han. So, you really like the way I look? You bet, he said. You're the prettiest girl on this planet, no kidding. She smiled, then the smile faded, and she looked troubled. You're apparently not the only one who thinks so, Vic. What do you mean? I had the strangest exchange with Ganner Taz, Teroenza's majordomo this morning. He'd apparently never seen beyond the pilgrim robes, but when I put these clothes on, he really noticed me. He followed me around for about an hour while I was trying to get some rearranging done, making conversation, or trying to. Those orangey-red eyes of his gave me chills. He's old, but it's obvious he still has, plenty of life in him, if you get my meaning. Male life. Han sat back. You mean that old creep was coming on to you? She shivered. I'm afraid so. He wanted to know how old I was, whether I was ever married, whether I had any children. He asked me why I'd wound up coming to Ilesia to be a pilgrim. Very personal questions. He had a lot of nerve. Han leaned forward. So why did you come here? Or do you consider that too personal to tell me too? She smiled wanly at him. Of course not, Vic. Why'd I come here? It seems so long ago, it's hard to even remember. I was going through a bad time. I just finished kid school, and was kind of scared at the idea of going to the university. I'd never been on my own before. My mother always kept a tight rein and made me feel as though I could never do anything right. Studying hard and behaving myself weren't enough for her. She smiled, but it was not a nice smile. My father encouraged me to have a career, but all mother could think about was my making a brilliant match. She thought her dreams had come true when I started seeing Dale. Han felt a stab of jealousy, but reminded himself that there had been other girls in his past. More than a few, matter of fact. We were on the verge of getting engaged when I caught him sneaking around with another girl. So I told him it was over. My mother was furious with me for breaking up with Dale. He came from one of the richest families on Corellia, and she'd already begun planning the wedding. She sighed. She ordered me to go to him and apologize, get him to take me back. For the first time in my life I told her no. She sounds like a very determined woman, Han said cautiously. Determined isn't the word. Mother had pushed me at Dale ever since we were in school together, and I didn't have the courage to tell her that I didn't like him that much. It's funny, her blue-green eyes grew misty. I didn't much want Dale, but when I knew he'd been sneaking around with someone else, I felt betrayed and heartbroken. People are strange, aren't they? Han nodded. Go on, he said encouragingly. Well, just about that time, I heard about a revival that was being held by an Ilesian missionary. I was feeling pretty down on myself, because I just knew I couldn't do anything right. Uprooted, you know. Cut off from everyone. So I went to the revival. The Ilesian priest finished his service with just a few seconds of exultation, and it made me feel so good. Like I belonged with those people. So I sold my jewelry, ran away, and caught the next ship for Ilesia. She smiled wistfully. So that's my story. And to return to the subject at hand, what do you think I should do to keep poor old Ganner Taz at arm's length? Well, if he bugs you too much, mention it to Teroenza. I'm sure he doesn't want anything to interfere with your work, and if Ganner Taz is doing that, then he'll put a stop to it. Okay, she said, cheering up. That's a good idea. Are you going to devotions? Han asked, giving her a significant glance. She shook her head. No. I don't want to. Won't they notice when you don't go? I can always say I had a headache or was working late. Most of the pilgrims can't wait to go, so they don't keep tabs on who's there. That's true. How about a walk then? Sure. When they were outside, Han walked them clear to the flowered plains before he broached the subject on his mind. Quickly he summarized that morning's interaction with Muirg. Bria was alarmed to realize that the Tagorian had been listening to them last night, and said so. Yeah, me too, Han replied. That big guy can be real quiet when he wants to be. No wonder he says he's the best hunter on this planet. He's apparently been following me the whole time I was scouting out the lay of this place, and figuring out the best way to get us out of here. We'd better be careful where we are, when we're discussing escape plans, she said, glancing nervously around. Why do you think I walked us clear out here before I even brought up the subject? The trees have ears around here. We've gotta be real careful. Last night it was only Muirg, so we're okay, but it could have been one of the skin changers they've got as guards down in the glitter stim factory. She shivered at the thought. So what did you have to tell me? Muirg's going to ask to go on a hunting trip while Jalis Nebel and I make the run to Null Huda. We've got it all set up. Teroenza approved me taking Nebel with me today. Null Huda's 2 systems away, and it'll take us 4 days, maybe 5. I promised Muirg he'd have that long to find out if Marav is still here, and that if she is, we'll take her with us. That would be good, Bria said. I hated the idea of leaving Muirg behind. If Teroenza got angry enough, he'd probably kill him for letting us escape, whether Muirg was responsible or not. Right. Han sighed. I just wish I could figure out a way to break into Teroenza's living quarters and search the place until I found where he keeps those ship access codes and the security lock codes for the collection. So far, I'm stumped. I've figured out a way to keep the guards busy, but if I can't get those codes I may have to change my plans. I might have to set the welcome center on fire or something. Security codes. Bria frowned and closed her eyes. Security codes. She drew a deep breath, then began reciting a string of numbers, symbols and letters. That sounds like it. Han grabbed her arm in excitement. How'd you get them? She gave him a tremulous smile. They were in Teroenza's mind. I'm afraid they're burned into mine, along with everything else. I wish I could forget them and all that other stuff, but I can't. He grabbed her shoulders and gave them an ecstatic little shake. Well, don't wish that till we're off this mudhole. Bria honey, this is great. You've saved me a lot of trouble. She smiled at him shakily. I paid an awful price for it, but if it helps us, I guess it was worth it. It will be, Han promised. Trust me. I swear it will be. She nodded. So all we have to do is avoid arousing suspicion until we're ready to make the break. That's gonna be easy for me, Nebel and I will be off-world. Think you can manage to just do business as usual here till we get back? I think so, she said. But, hurry back. I will, sweetheart, he said. Bria gave Han a pleading look. After we're free, could we go to Corellia Vic? I want to see my folks again. I want to let them know I'm all right. Han gave her a reassuring smile. Sure, sweetheart. I've got some business to take care of on Corellia, so that'll be one of our first stops, okay? She gave him a radiant answering smile. Okay. When Vic left her at the door to her dorm, Bria told herself that she'd just go upstairs and take a nap until it was time to go to dinner. If anyone asked, she'd plead a headache as an excuse for missing devotions. But when she reached her room, she picked up her pilgrim's robe and cap and stood holding them. Tomorrow, she thought. I'll start tomorrow. After all, I've had a rough couple of days. Nobody could expect me to miss the exaltation just like that. I need a day to work myself up to it. And before she knew what she was doing, Bria found herself back in her robes and cap, hurrying down the path of immortality, toward the altar of promises. 2 days later, a jittery Han and a placid Jaelus Nebel stood waiting outside Gilliac the Hutt's audience room in his winter palace. A small hollow recording device rested at Han's feet. It was designed to project a visual and audio simulacrum of the sender. Nebel was steadying a large elaborate box on an anti-grav lifter. The box contained the gift Zavel the Hutt had sent to his business associate, and sometime rival Gilliac. Wonder how much longer we'll have to wait, Han muttered nervously, pacing a bit. It's been almost an hour. For an audience with a clan leader, this is nothing, Jaelus Nebel said. Once I waited 2 days to even reach the antechamber. And don't forget, we've got to wait for a reply. Once I waited a week. Don't tell me that, Han grumbled. I don't want to hear about everything that can go wrong. I'm still skeptical that we're gonna walk out of this place alive. Hutts are notoriously bad-tempered, you know. I already told you, we're perfectly safe, the Celestin replied. Forgive me if I'm being dense, but why can you be so sure of that? Han snapped. Long ago, in the early days of their coming to Nal Hutta, Hutts lost so many messengers that communications between the clans completely broke down, and everyone lost profit because of it, Nebel explained. So all the clans made a sworn pact, a messenger from one hut to another is sacrosanct. While delivering Zavel's message, and taking back his reply, we cannot be touched or interfered with in any way. Yeah, I sure hope you're right, Han mumbled. He looked over at the big box. I thought Zavel was mad at Jiliak, he whispered. So how come he's sending him a gift? Nebel shook his head. Gifts are traditional. To gain a Hutt's attention, you must either present him with a gift or threaten him or her. Sometimes Hutts do both at the same time. Han grimaced. Weird. You sure you don't have any idea what's in there? That box is big enough to hold most anything. Even a body, if you folded it up. I'd feel better if I knew. The box is sealed, Nebel pointed out. If we open it, His Excellency Jiliak will know. We don't want any trouble. Yeah. I know. Han grimaced and, to distract himself from his worries, looked around. The antechamber was high-ceilinged, with skylights. It was built of light-colored stone, and the pale walls were hung with tapestries woven, it was said, by Jiliak's enemies while they languished in his dungeons, waiting for the mercy of execution. One depicted the original Hutt homeworld, the desolate and barren planet Varl, and another the great cataclysm that destroyed it long, long ago. Still another showed the great Hutt diaspora to Nal-Hutta in the Ytub system. Nal-Hutta, Han knew, meant, glorious jewel, in Huttese. The last tapestry was a full-sized portrait of Jiliak himself, reclining in state upon his lavishly appointed but tasteful dais. Han hadn't seen much of Nal-Hutta, since he and Nebel had been whisked into a droid-chauffeured landspeeder and taken south, to Jiliak's remote winter palace. The Hutt Lord's retreat was located on a small island near the equator. Jailus Nebel had informed Han that he was lucky, that this island was, by comparison with the rest of Nal-Hutta, a virtual, garden spot, on this dank and noisome world. This island reminded him of Ilesia, hot, humid and full of giant trees choked with huge vines. Han's attention jerked back to the here and now when he realized that Dorzo, Jiliak's Rhodian majordomo, was beckoning to them. His Supreme Excellency Jiliak, clan leader and protector of the righteous, will see you now. Hastily Han picked up his recorder, and then he and Nebel walked into the audience chamber. It was huge. Han paced up the central aisle toward the dais, feeling the luxurious pile of an expensive carpet beneath his boots. The chamber was filled with fawning sycophants of all races, tastefully garbed dancing girls and boys, and an orchestra off in one corner. A massive buffet table heaped with food from a dozen worlds made his nostrils twitch as Han suddenly recalled that he'd forgotten to eat lunch. Jiliak reclined at his ease on an audience dais, smoking something that Han couldn't identify, but which he wanted no part of. Even the faint whiff he got of the expelled smoke made his head swim. Jailus Nebel nudged Han, and he nervously stepped forward. Almighty Jiliak, he said in Huttese, recalling the speech Zavel had rehearsed with him, we come from our Ilesian master Zavel the Hutt to bring you a message and a gift. First, the gift, he beckoned to Nebel, and the Celestin, as agreed, stepped forward. Jiliak peered down at them, then ordered in Huttese, open it. I wish to see what Zavel deems worthy of me. Yes, Your Excellency, squeaked the Celestin, who set about slitting all the seals and releasing all the catches. Han watched in fascination as the Celestin raised the lid on the box and withdrew two crystalline globes with bronze supports, which he balanced one upon the other, and then placed the entire contraption upon a sturdy curved bronze stand. All of the metal was chased with gold and silver designs. There was a small housing on the back of the bottom globe that contained some kind of battery, Han thought. The Corellian stared at the thing in perplexity. He had no idea what the device was. Jiliak did, however, a combination hookah and snackwarium. he boomed, speaking of course, in Huttese, which Han by this time understood very well. And one almost worthy of our greatness. Just what I wanted. How did he know? He turned his attention back to the two messengers and continued, more formally, messengers, Zavel's gift pleases me. Let us hope his message does as well. Activated human. Han bowed low, set the recorder on a low table, and switched it on. Immediately a hollow simulacrum of Zavel appeared, filling the space before Gilliack's dais. My dear Gilliack, Zavel said, stretching out a hand toward Gilliack, as though he could see the other and were really present. Over the past year, some unfortunate occurrences have plagued our shipping operations out of Ilesia. Ships have disappeared, and one ship was attacked. As one of the heads of our Cajadir, it was my duty to trace down these despicable incursions. Gilliack's pleased expression had faded. Han cast a nervous glance at the Celestin. I sure hope he's right about us being safe. We have traced these so-called pirates to Narshada, and recently my operatives have captured and questioned one of the captains of these vessels. This unfortunate individual revealed, before succumbing to a weak heart, that he was recruited and sent upon his villainous missions by you and your great-nephew Jabba. Your enmity wounds us deeply, and what is more important, cuts into our profit margin. Be warned, Gilliack. Leave our shipments alone. Any more attacks will meet with swift reprisal upon you and your clan. We have assembled a great fleet, which will surely vanquish your paltry forces. We have, thought Han wildly. There's just me and Nebel. Zavel's bluffing. Or did he recently hire more pilots? Zavel's message continued inexorably, accept our gift as a peace offering, or meet with grim consequences, among which your own death will be the least. Gilliack, I appeal to you in the name of Hutt Brotherhood to cease hijacking and terrorizing our vessels. We can make a much better profit if we work together, instead of contending with each other. By this time, Han and the Celestin were backing away in terror, because Gilliack was swelling up like a poisoned wound. Heed my warning, Gilliack. Cease your... Gilliack's scream of fury made Han and Nebel leap behind the buffet table. The Hutt Lord's tail lashed out in a giant sweep to strike the recording device, sending it flying. Zavel's image vanished. Gilliack slid forward. Han watched in horrified fascination. It was the first time he'd seen a Hutt Lord move under its own power. Messengers, Gilliack screamed. Come forth. Slowly, reluctantly, Han and Nebel crawled around the edge of the table and got shakily to their feet. Yes, almighty Gilliack, Nebel quavered. Han was incapable of speech. I send you back to that worm-ridden parasitical infestation who calls himself Zavel, Gilliack raged, tail lashing, as he moved back and forth. Tell him he has maligned me and my kin Jabba. Tell him this lack-witted attempt to incite me into a precipitous attack has failed utterly. I will bide my time. He is a dead Hutt, but for the moment, by my grace, he may pretend to be among the living. I alone will decide when he is to die, and it will be at my convenience. Do you understand, messengers? Yes, Almighty One, Han said, having recovered his voice. It was obvious that Gilliack was letting them go, and he wanted nothing more than to get off this world. He bowed, then bowed again. I'll tell him exactly what you said. Good. You may go. Take my message to Zavel immediately. Bowing, Han and Nebel backed from the audience room. Once outside, they hastily leapt into their transport and ordered the droid driver to return them to the spaceport immediately. Han had never been so glad to see the Elysian dream waiting for him. He and Jailus Nebel ran across the landing field, scrambled up the ramp, and threw themselves into the control cabin. Only when they were out in space, and Han was pulling the lever to send them streaking into hyperspace, did enough of his sense of humor return that he was able to grin feebly at the Celestin. "Well, Neville," he said, "that went well, didn't it?" The Celestin rolled his large wet eyes. "You still don't understand, Vic," he said. "When one is dealing with the Hutts, there are wheels within wheels within wheels. It's entirely possible that Zavel sent that message because we are vulnerable, to keep Gilliac from attacking more openly. We're just underlings. We only see part of the picture. All you can do is pray to any gods you believe in that you never anger a Hutt. One would be better off dead, and that is no understatement." Han nodded. "I believe you. Still, if I were Zavel, I wouldn't rest too easily at night. He may not have long to live." Muir glided through the jungle in the dimness of the short Elysian twilight. It had taken him a day and a half to travel the 147 kilometers to Colony 2. Part of his slowness had come from the perilous crossing of the Gachugai River. He'd been so exhausted by struggling through the rapid current that he'd had to take 2 hours out of his trip to hunt and then another hour to sleep. He was still tired from his ordeal, but he was finally here. He listened for the sounds of chanting voices as he skirted the perimeter of the compound. Colony 2 followed, as far as he knew, the same schedule as Colony 1, so the pilgrims should be at the evening devotions. His nostrils flared as he tested the wind, constantly sniffing for any Tagorian spoor. Several times, Muir got down on his hands and knees, and moved forward, sniffing, drinking in the scents left by the pilgrims who had recently passed this way. 5 minutes later he jerked as if he'd been hit with a stun prod. Mrav. Mrav came this way, no more than a day ago. Wandering cautiously around the outskirts of the buildings, he located first the dorm she slept in, then the factory where she worked. Lastly, he followed the freshest scent trail to a path that he was sure must lead to the altar of promises. Apparently Colony 2 was laid out on a nearly identical plan to Colony 1. Without checking farther, the Tagorian melted back into the jungle and moved as quickly as he could toward the site of the devotions. For a moment he wondered whether Mrav might scent his trail, but it was unlikely. He'd been thoroughly soaked in that river, and had deliberately avoided the instinct to rub against anything and leave scent markers. He didn't want Mrav to try following him back to Colony 1, and possibly becoming lost in the jungle when his trail was interrupted by the river. The Tagorian arrived just in time to automatically resist the mental and physical waves of the exultation. Narrowing his eyes, Muir scanned the writhing forms in front of him and found Mrav. She was twitching, but not really writhing. And there was something false about the way she moved that allowed him to pick her out easily. She is faking, Muir thought. I knew Mrav was too strong-minded to be fooled by these liars for long. He strained his eyes to make out every line of her beneath her pilgrim's robe. But all he could see clearly was her head, orange stripes contrasting vividly with the white. He longed to see her lovely yellow eyes, but he was behind her and to her right. She could not see him. For a second, Muir nearly threw caution and his vow to Vic to the winds. It was everything he could do not to race into the crowd of pilgrims, grab his mate-to-be, and carry her off into the jungle. But he had given Vic his word of honor. Mrav must not know he was here. As the pilgrims staggered to their feet, the exultation over, Muir's eyes widened as he saw that Mrav was wearing a blue sash, as were about 50 of the 100 or so pilgrims at the devotion. That sash. That's the sash of the chosen ones. Oh no. He could have hissed aloud in his frustration and fear. Muir had been on Ilesia for many months. He'd seen those sashes before. Sure enough, as the pilgrims began shuffling into the night, the high priest stepped up to call out to them in his booming voice. All pilgrims who were issued blue sashes today, please remain behind. Your high priest has an announcement to make. Obediently, the pilgrims with blue sashes stopped walking toward the path and instead shuffled forward. Mrav looked as though she was thinking of yanking off her sash and making a run for it, but she didn't. Murg yowled inwardly. Does she know what those sashes mean? Those of you who have received these blue sashes are being honored as chosen ones. Your piety and devotion to the One and the All have caused us to select you for a singular honor. Tomorrow night will be your last devotion here at this altar. At dawn on the following morning, you will be taken by spaceship to meet with our missionaries, and each of you will be selected by one of our missionaries to accompany him out to spread the word of the One and the All. Murg heard excited, greedy murmurings from the crowd, and knew the true pilgrims were ecstatic over the implication that they would be able to receive exaltations without sharing it with hundreds of other pilgrims. Stupid, was the Tagorian's first thought. They are no better than Bist or Etalo, worthy only of being hunted and eaten. Those spaceships will take them only to the mines of Kessel or the pleasure houses of the imperial soldiers. They will receive no more exaltations, they will live in degradation and misery, and most of them will die within a year. His second thought raised the fur along his neck and spine. Only a day and a half until they ship her out of here. Since the imperial soldiers want only humanoids in the pleasure houses, that must mean that Mrav is destined for the mines on Kessel. They figure that since she is Tagorian, and strong, she will last a long time in the mines. Murg slammed a hand against a tree bole. Curse them, I have little time. The Ilesian overlords will undoubtedly call upon Vic or the Celestin to ferry these pilgrims to the space station to await the Kessel transport that is coming. I must be back at Colony 1 to help Vic, so we can all escape together. Murg leapt to his feet and loped off through the jungle, feeling fear drive the fatigue from his body. He turned his face southeast, heading back for Colony 1. There was no time to lose. Mrav's very life hung in the balance. The Tagorian ran, leaping over logs and streams, ducking through low-lying bushes. His breath came easily, but he knew that would not last long. He was already travel-weary, but that could not be allowed to matter. Like a black shadow in the blacker night, the Tagorian ran. Bria had just finished devotions and was heading for the path leading back to her dorm when Ganer Taz fell into step beside her. She stiffened, keeping her head down, and refused to look up. I wish Vic were back. He's been gone 3 days now. Ganer Taz wouldn't be following me around like this if Vic were here. The elderly Zizhan reached out to grasp her arm, but Bria yanked it away. The majordomo smiled as he stepped forward, barring her path. The Exalted One, Teroenza, wishes to speak with you, Pilgrim 921, he said. Oh no, she thought, feeling her heart seem to stop, then slam in her chest so hard she was afraid Ganer Taz would actually hear it. Teroenza has figured out that I was the one who telepathically probed his mind. Well, what does he want? She managed to say, through stiff lips, wondering if she should just try to make a run for it. Perhaps she could hide out in the jungle for a day or so until Vic returned. He has something to discuss with you, Taz said, smiling at her. Bria cringed from that smile, but she decided there was no point in running. The guards would only track her down and kill her. So she turned and headed back toward the altar of promises. When she reached Teroenza, the high priest peered down at her as she made the proper obeisance. Bria's heart pounded, and she was so frightened she felt lightheaded, dizzy. Pilgrim 921, Teroenza addressed her in his booming voice, you have served us faithfully, and I am pleased with you. I am also pleased with my loyal servant Ganner Taz. I wish to reward both of you. Bria glanced sideways at the Zijin, whose orange eyes were practically glowing with happiness. Oh no! I have a bad feeling about this. Teroenza indicated the majordomo. Ganner Taz has asked me for your hand in marriage, and I am pleased to grant his request. Stand before me, and I will pronounce the words to make you his wife. Bria gasped and wondered if she should let herself faint. She felt as though she might be able to do it. Black spots swam before her eyes, and her ears rang. Then she felt a wash of pleasure engulf her, such exquisite pleasure that she almost passed out from that. The pleasure was so intense, so warm, so loving, that she might almost have agreed to anything, just to have it continue. But just as she was about to nod like a pliant zombie, Vic's face swam before her eyes. Bria's spine stiffened, and her chin came up. She didn't dare faint. If she did, she'd likely wake up married to Ganner Taz and being carried back to their nuptial bed. The thought made her gag, and the priest's pleasure vibes lost their power over her. Bria experienced a sudden, vivid image of herself sharing a bed with Ganner Taz, and for an awful second she was afraid she might be sick. Control yourself, she commanded. Think. But, exalted one, she murmured timidly, forcing herself to keep her eyes modestly downcast, I have taken vows of chastity. I cannot marry anyone. Your piety does you credit, pilgrim, Teroenza boomed. And yet, the one and the all bless fruitful unions, just as much as they bless the celibate state. I am granting you a special dispensation so that you may marry Ganner Taz and raise your children to be faithful to the one and the all. Clever old monster, Bria thought, hating Teroenza as she'd never hated anyone before in her life. There's no way around his argument without my committing blasphemy. She took a long, deep breath, to give herself time to think. Very well, exalted one, she said meekly. If you say this is the will of the one and the all, I must bow to it. I will be a good wife to Ganner Taz. Gritting her teeth inwardly, she forced herself to lay her hand on his warty green arm. Good, pilgrim, Teroenza said, raising his arms to begin the ceremony. But, exalted one, Bria raised her voice slightly, I must follow the customs of my own people before I can consider myself legally married. Before the priest could refuse her, she hurried on, they are simple, and easily fulfilled, exalted one. I ask for but a day to purify myself and meditate upon the sacred state of marriage. Also, on Corellia, it is traditional for a woman to wear a green gown to her wedding. I can easily ask the tailor droid to prepare one for me by tomorrow evening. Bria held her breath as Teroenza hesitated. Finally, the high priest must have decided that she wasn't asking for that much. Very well, pilgrim 921, he boomed. Ganner Taz's face fell. Tomorrow evening, before the entire assembly, you and Ganner Taz shall be joined. May the blessing of the one and the all be upon you. Teroenza sketched a quick sign in the air, and then turned and lumbered away. Ganner Taz headed purposefully for Bria. I will walk you back to your dorm, he said. Very well, she agreed, but she pulled away when he tried to put an arm around her. The groom must not touch the bride during the last day before the ceremony, she cooed, lying through her teeth. Another Corellian tradition. Surely you can wait one short day, my groom-to-be. He nodded shortly. Very well, wife-to-be. I swear to you, I will be a good husband. It is my fondest wish that we will be blessed with many children. That is my fondest wish too, Bria said sweetly. Within the voluminous sleeves of her robes, she crossed all the fingers of both hands. Please Vic, she thought frantically, hurry back. Please.